Section 1. The hidden origins where Family Guy really came from. There's something deeply satisfying about settling in at the end of a long day, with something that feels both familiar and quietly surprising. So let's ease into this the right way, together, with the full strange and wonderful story of how one of the most recognizable animated shows on Earth almost never existed at all, and why basically everything you think you know about how it started is only about half the picture. Seth MacFarlane was born on the 26th of October 1973 in Kent, Connecticut. He was a kid who drew constantly. Not doodles on the margins of his notebooks, but actual characters, fully formed little creatures with personalities and voices that lived in his head long before they ever made it to paper. His family described him as someone who was always performing, always narrating, always making up stories with sound effects and accents attached. He was drawing his own comic strips by the time he was 9 years old. Local newspapers in Connecticut actually published some of them. A 9-year-old kid getting his art printed in a real newspaper. That tells you something about where this was all going. He studied at the Rhode Island School of Design, which is one of the most prestigious art and design programs in the country. While he was there, something happened that would quietly set everything in motion. He started paying attention to the security guards. Not in any dramatic way, just listening. There was something about the way certain New England guys talked big, opinionated, a little loud, good-natured in a way that could tip into bluster at any moment that fascinated him. One security guard in particular, a man named Paul Timmons, had a voice that MacFarlane found endlessly entertaining. Heavy Rhode Island accent, this warm, rumbling quality to it. The kind of voice that sounds like it should be attached to someone who has very strong opinions about football and absolutely zero patience for nonsense. MacFarlane filed that voice away somewhere deep in his memory, and years later it became the foundation for Peter Griffin. But before Peter Griffin existed in any recognizable form, MacFarlane made something called The Life of Larry. This was his college thesis film, and it starred a middle-aged guy named Larry Cummings, who was older than Peter Griffin would eventually be, with white hair and a slight bald patch, but who had a dog named Steve with intelligence that far outpaced everyone around him. Larry had a wife. He had a Rhode Island accent. He had a certain slovenly lovability. If you watch The Life of Larry now, and it's been circulated online enough that most dedicated fans have seen it, the DNA of Family Guy is unmistakable. The thesis film wasn't just a school project. It was a prototype. MacFarlane's professor was so impressed with the work that he submitted it to Hanna-Barbera, the legendary animation studio responsible for The Flintstones, Scooby-Doo, The Jetsons, Yogi Bear, and basically every other animated cornerstone of mid-20th century American television. Hanna-Barbera hired MacFarlane straight out of college. He was 22 years old. He moved to Los Angeles and started working on shows like Johnny Bravo, Cow and Chicken, and Dexter's Laboratory. Good shows. Solid, well-loved cartoons with genuine creative energy behind them. But MacFarlane was already thinking about something else, something bigger, something that would carry Larry and Steve forward into a new shape. He made a follow-up short in 1996 called Larry and Steve, which aired as one of Cartoon Network's world premiere tunes in 1997. That series of shorts was designed to give animators a chance to pitch material in short form, almost like an animated anthology. Larry and Steve were refined versions of the thesis characters. The dog Steve is basically Brian Griffin with different fur, and Larry is clearly Peter's evolutionary ancestor. The short got attention. Fox executives saw it. They reached out. Now, here's where it gets interesting. MacFarlane assumed that what Fox wanted was short animated inserts for Mad TV, the sketch comedy series that was airing on the network. He thought he was going to make little animated bits to run between sketches. That's what he went into the first meeting expecting. Instead, Fox asked him to develop a full primetime animated series based on the Larry and Steve characters. He was 23 years old. He had never run a television show. He had never even been a writer on a television show in any significant capacity. And Fox was essentially handing him the keys to a primetime slot. He went home and built the Griffin family around the bones of Larry and Steve. Larry became Peter, younger and rounder, with a new name drawn from the combination of Family Guy producer Seth's own name and a Griffin surname that felt right for a New England Irish Catholic household. Steve became Brian's same breed, same intelligence, same quiet dignity, but now a white Labrador retriever who had inexplicably come to live with a human family and was handling it all with remarkable composure. Lois was created as the counterweight to Peter, a woman who came from old money and married down out of love, which gave their relationship an interesting texture from the very beginning. The kids came next: Chris, the awkward son, Meg, the invisible teenager, and then Stewie, who came from a completely different conceptual place than the rest of them. MacFarlane put together a 15-minute animated pilot and delivered it to Fox in May of 1998. The network greenlit it. They scheduled the premiere of the full series for the 31st of January 1999, directly after Super Bowl 33, one of the most watched television events of any given year. The first episode, Death Has a Shadow, was watched by approximately 22 million people. 22 million. For a brand new animated comedy about a fictional family in a made-up town in Rhode Island, that was a staggering number. It was a bigger audience than most established shows could claim at the time. What almost nobody knows is how close the show came to not existing in this form at all. The Mad TV connection is real. MacFarlane genuinely expected his pitch meeting with Fox to result in short-form animated segments for that sketch show, not a full series order. And the show was almost called something completely different. Early development documents apparently contained placeholder titles before Family Guy was settled on, though the family name Griffin was locked in very early as part of MacFarlane's desire to root the show in Irish Catholic New England culture. The town name, the one we all know, that Rhode Island municipality built around this family's chaotic existence, was based loosely on Providence, but filtered through a particular kind of working-class coastal New England sensibility. MacFarlane named it after the type of clam that's native to the region. A quahog is a hard-shell clam found abundantly along the Rhode Island and Massachusetts coastlines. It's one of the most New England things imaginable, which is very much the point. MacFarlane became the youngest executive producer in network television history when Family Guy debuted. He was 24 years old. He was voicing 4 main characters, writing scripts, supervising animation, and running the entire production. The amount of creative output he was managing simultaneously was extraordinary. He voiced Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Quagmire, 4 distinct characters who required not just different vocal performances, but entirely different emotional registers. Peter's voice is based on that security guard, Paul Timmons, with a warm Rhode Island roughness to it. Brian's voice is MacFarlane's own natural speaking voice, which is something that surprises a lot of people when they first find out. The voice you hear when Brian is being wry and intellectual and slightly world-weary is just Seth MacFarlane talking. No performance adjustment, no character affect layered on top. He has said in interviews that Brian was always the character he felt most comfortable playing because it required the least transformation. MacFarlane has a picture of Brian on his office door, next to his name. His favorite character, in his own voice, looking back at him every time he walks in. Quagmire's voice is described by MacFarlane as a character he imagined from the Rat Pack era, someone who got frozen in time somewhere around 1962 and never quite updated. The voice has a certain lounge singer smoothness to it, a kind of practiced charm that sits just slightly out of step with everyone around him. And Stewie came from somewhere else entirely. MacFarlane was reading about the production of My Fair Lady, the 1964 musical film based on George Bernard Shaw's Pygmalion, starring Rex Harrison as Professor Henry Higgins, the posh linguistic expert who transforms a Cockney flower girl into someone who can pass in high society. MacFarlane was fascinated by Rex Harrison's delivery, this patrician, slightly contemptuous, clipped British enunciation that made everything sound like it was being said from a position of absolute certainty about the stupidity of everyone in the room. He transplanted that voice into a 1-year-old baby and described the result to interviewers as an evil Rex Harrison. That description is so precise it almost feels like a formula. Evil Rex Harrison, trapped in a diaper, plotting against his mother. You almost don't need to watch the show after that. You already understand everything. The early writing team that MacFarlane assembled was strong. Chris Sheridan, Danny Smith, Gary Janetti, Neil Goldman, Garrett Donovan, Matt Weitzman, and Mike Barker were among the original group, and their collective sensibility shaped the tone of those first 3 seasons in ways that are still visible if you go back and watch them now. The writing was sharp, and the stories had actual architecture beginning, middle, end, something learned, something felt. The cutaway gags were there from the very start, but they were deployed more like punctuation than like full sentences. They enhanced the rhythm of an already solid episode rather than providing the episode's entire skeleton. There's one more hidden piece of origin history that almost nobody talks about, and it involves Seth MacFarlane almost dying before the show even became what it became. In September 2001, MacFarlane was booked on American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles. He had been given the wrong departure time by his travel agent, and he arrived at Logan Airport just after the gate had closed. He missed the flight. American Airlines Flight 11 was the first plane to be hijacked on the 11th of September 2001. It struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center at 8:46 inches the morning. Every person aboard died. Seth MacFarlane missed that flight by a matter of minutes, the direct result of a small clerical error that turned out to be the difference between everything and nothing. Family Guy was in its third season at the time. It had already been canceled once, had already come back, and was heading toward what would be its second and more permanent cancellation. The show that would go on to run for more than 25 seasons, that would influence an entire generation of animated comedy, that would produce hundreds of episodes watched by hundreds of millions of people, all of it hinging on a wrong departure time written down by a travel agent on a September morning in 2001. So when you settle in with Family Guy tonight, whatever season, whatever episode, know that the whole thing has an unexpectedly fragile origin, a thesis film, a case of mistaken meeting expectations, a security guard's voice, a wrong time on a boarding pass. The whole enormous, chaotic, inexhaustible thing grew out of a handful of accidents and coincidences that could have easily pointed in completely different directions. Hey, before we go any further, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if you're enjoying this, a subscription means a lot. Now let's keep going. Section 2. The Secret Language of Stewie Griffin. There is a case to be made that Stewie Griffin is one of the most technically complex characters ever written for a primetime animated series. Not because the concept is complicated, it's actually the opposite of complicated, almost absurdly simple in its premise. Baby who wants to take over the world. Baby who wants to kill his mother. Baby who builds ray guns. The genius of early Stewie isn't the complexity of his goals. It's the layers embedded in how he pursues them, how he talks about them, and the specific details in his design, his backstory, and his language that most viewers never consciously register. Start with the voice, which we touched on briefly in the last section, but which deserves a much slower examination. MacFarlane has described Stewie's accent as an upper-class English articulation filtered through the character psychology of someone who is simultaneously the most intelligent person in any room and also, at some deep biological level, still very much a baby. That tension is everything. The accent implies a kind of inherited sophistication that has nothing to do with his actual origins. He is the son of a Rhode Island man who worked at a toy factory and a woman who teaches piano lessons. There is no conceivable genetics-based explanation for why this child sounds like he was educated at Eton, and the show knows this. The show eventually addressed it directly. In the Season 10 anthology episode Viewer Mail 2, one of the segments imagines an alternate universe where the entire Griffin family is British. Peter has an upper-class English accent. Lois sounds like she went to Oxford. Chris and Meg speak like characters out of a period drama. But Stewie, in this British Griffin universe, speaks like a stereotypical Southern American redneck. He has an exaggerated country drawl, completely out of place in a household where everyone else is quintessentially English. The implication of this is strange and wonderful. Stewie is always the odd one out. If the family were British, he'd be American. Since the family is American, he's British. He's inherently, constitutionally different from the people around him, and his voice is the most immediate expression of that difference. The accent isn't about his actual origins. The accent is about the fact that he exists at a permanent angle to his family, to his environment, to everything. The episode that makes this explicit in the most direct way aired in Season 16, when a session with a child psychologist, one of the show's most unusual and quietly powerful episodes, revealed a whole set of facts about Stewie that had been embedded in the series for years without formal acknowledgement. The British accent in that episode is confirmed to be deliberately affected. Stewie uses it because he wants to feel special. He wants to create a kind of distance between himself and the world, a buffer of perceived sophistication that makes his loneliness, which the episode also confirms, is profound and constant, slightly more manageable. The hair, which he habitually pulls out due to anxiety, the accent adopted as armor, the elaborate schemes designed to occupy a mind that has no appropriate outlet, all of it traces back to a baby who is desperately, chronically alone in a house full of people who don't fully understand him. His full name is Stuart Gilligan Griffin. The middle name Gilligan has never been fully explained within the show's canon, though it has a nautical, slightly absurdist ring to it that fits the show's sensibility. He was born on the 11th of September 1998, according to the episode Yug Ilimaf, which involves a time machine reversal that plays his birth backward in remarkable anatomical detail. His birth time, shown in that episode, is 11:34 inches the morning. MacFarlane and the writers gave him a birthday that would later acquire very different cultural weight, and the show has made dark reference to this on at least one occasion. The football-shaped head is one of those design choices that is so immediately recognizable that most people stop noticing it exists. It's just Stewie. But the reason his head is that shape is functional within the visual language of the show. Most of the characters in Family Guy have round heads they're designed to read clearly in profile, to express emotion through the simplest possible geometries. Stewie's elongated head was a deliberate departure, a visual signal that he was something different, something that didn't quite fit the standard template. It also, as a happy accident, gives him a silhouette that's immediately identifiable in any scene, even when the animation is moving quickly and the details are small. The teddy bear Rupert is a piece of Stewie's characterization that runs deeper than it might initially appear. In the early seasons, Stewie treats Rupert as a confidant, speaking to him at length in what appear to be one-sided conversations about his plans and feelings. This is entirely consistent with normal, one-year-old developmental behavior children that age often engage in parallel play and monologue with inanimate objects, processing their internal experience through the external presence of a beloved toy. The layers here are exquisite. Stewie is a super genius evil mastermind who also, genuinely, needs his bear. His relationship with Rupert isn't a joke at his expense, it's evidence of the authenticity buried inside the absurdity. He is actually a baby. He just happens to be a baby who has built a time machine. The way other characters interact with Stewie's speech is one of the show's most carefully maintained conceits, particularly in the early seasons. In those first 3 years, most adult characters couldn't understand Stewie at all. They heard the sounds he made as infant babbling. When he delivered a 12-sentence monologue about the construction of a mind control device, Lois would smile and say something like, "Who's a hungry baby?" The dramatic irony of this setup provided a specific kind of comedy that doesn't actually require a punchline. You laugh because you understand what's happening and the character doesn't. The gap between what Stewie means and what the adults perceive is the joke, and it never fully wore out its welcome in the early seasons because the writers kept finding new angles on it. Brian was the exception, the one character who could not only hear Stewie but also understand him and respond to him in full sentences. This is never explained. The show makes no attempt to justify why the family dog has a bilateral relationship with the baby, while the human family members hear only gibberish. It's simply established and maintained, and it creates the scaffolding for the friendship that becomes central to the show's best episodes across multiple seasons. There is something quietly moving about the idea that the only character in this household who can really hear this extraordinary lonely child is the dog, a creature who is himself an outsider in the family structure, himself existing in a space between human and animal that nobody has ever quite resolved. The weapons that Stewie builds in his early seasons are worth cataloging because each one represents a different branch of physics or engineering that a one-year-old should not conceptually have access to. He built a multiverse-traversing portal. He built a hypno ring. He built a time machine that could function across centuries. He built weather control devices. He built robots capable of autonomous action. He built a shrink ray. The scale of what he was casually constructing in the bedroom of a Providence area home while his parents were downstairs watching television is frankly staggering when you lay it all out. The show presented his lab as a kind of TARDIS-like impossible space, hidden behind the walls of a normal nursery, bigger inside than outside, equipped with technology that shouldn't exist, humming quietly while Lois hung immobile above his crib with absolutely no awareness of what was behind the drywall. There is a specific detail in the episode Chitty Chitty Death Bang from Season 1 that a lot of people missed, even watching it carefully. This episode marks Stewie's first birthday. He turns 1 during the episode, which canonically establishes that he was not yet 1 year old during the pilot and the events immediately following it. He was, in other words, constructing world domination devices at an age when most children are working on object permanence and learning that dropping a spoon from a high chair is a repeatable experiment. The episode is about his attempt to prevent his birthday party, which he associates with a cult figure he has been in communication with since before his birth, a kind of sinister anticipation that adds a whole theological layer to his character that the show largely left unexplored after those early seasons. The episode Brian and Stewie from Season 8 is the purest distillation of what makes the character work when the writing is genuinely committed to him. The episode places Brian and Stewie alone in a bank vault for its entire running time. No cutaways, no subplot, no other characters. Just these two having a real conversation, sometimes painfully honest, about who they are and what they mean to each other. Stewie asks Brian why he keeps a gun in his safety deposit box. Brian tells him the truth. It's one of the heaviest moments in the show's history, and it works because both characters, especially Stewie, have been established over many seasons as real people with real inner lives. You've earned the weight of that conversation because you've spent years watching them be themselves. In the later seasons, as Stewie moved away from his evil genius identity, the show began exploring his sexuality and gender expression with increasing frequency. Cross-dressing became a recurring element. Attraction to other male characters was referenced in nearly every episode he appeared in. In the Season 16 episode, Send in Stewie, Please, which is structured as a single extended therapy session, Stewie confirms in-universe that his British accent is an affectation. He reveals that he is bisexual. He talks about his extreme loneliness. He drops the accent for a brief period and speaks in an American voice, Seth MacFarlane performing, Stewie performing being the version of himself he hides, and the character sounds shockingly vulnerable. Then, predictably, he snaps the mask back into place. The accent returns. The walls go back up. He lets the therapist die to protect his secrets. The scene is so carefully constructed that it almost functions as a meta-commentary on the entire history of the character. Here is who Stewie really is, and here is why he can never let anyone see it. One of the most widely noted recurring details about Stewie concerns the way the show handles his physical age. He has remained approximately 1 year old since his first birthday episode in Season 1. At some point during the run of the show, he celebrated what appeared to be a second birthday, but this happened in a later season that aired more than a decade after that first birthday episode. In the episode The Big Bang Theory from Season 9, a time travel storyline involving Stewie and a rival genius baby named Bertram establishes that Stewie was at one point in cryogenic stasis for approximately 492 years, which would technically make him the oldest character on the show by an enormous margin. The show treats this fact with the lightness it deserves. It's a throwaway within a larger plot, but it does mean that somewhere in Stewie Griffin's technically canonical timeline, he spent almost 5 centuries frozen while the world went on without him. His relationship with his mother is the emotional spine of his early characterization, and the show plays with the specifics of it in ways that reward close attention. Stewie refers to his grudge against Lois as stemming from his 9-month stay in her ovarian Bastille, a specific, historically resonant metaphor comparing his gestation to imprisonment in the most infamous jail in French history, the storming of which launched the French Revolution. He experiences his birth as liberation from tyranny. His entire war against Lois is, by his own description, the continuation of that revolutionary impulse. He was born fighting, and his mother is the first frontier. And then there's Rupert's secret life. In the later seasons, the show reveals occasional hints that Rupert might be more than just a stuffed animal in Stewie's mind. In certain episodes, Rupert appears to have independent reactions. In one episode, Stewie returns from a long absence to find Rupert in what appears to be a romantic relationship with another toy. The jealousy Stewie experiences is entirely genuine and entirely devastating. It's played for dark comedy, but underneath it, the episode is saying something real about how much Stewie has invested in this toy bear as his most reliable relationship. In a household where nobody hears him, in a world where he is profoundly and persistently alone, Rupert is the one constant. The one presence that never disappoints him, never fails to be available, never makes him feel invisible. And when Rupert appears to have moved on without him, even within the confines of Stewie's own imagination, the loss is real. There is one more Stewie detail that belongs at the end of this section, because it's one of the strangest and most unsettling things hiding in plain sight within the show's mythology. In the future set episode Stewie Griffin, The Untold Story, which aired as a direct-to-DVD film in 2005, Stewie travels to the future and meets his adult self. His adult self turns out to be an unremarkable, directionless young man working a dead-end job, the evil genius potential completely unrealized, the world domination ambitions long since abandoned, the brilliant mind turned toward nothing in particular. Future Stewie is, in other words, exactly what you might expect to happen if you took a child prodigy and surrounded him for long enough with people who weren't paying attention. He became ordinary because nobody around him was extraordinary enough to draw the best out of him. The most gifted mind in the Griffin household, left to develop in isolation, quietly stopped trying. Stewie, at his best, in those first 3 seasons, understood all of this implicitly. He wasn't building weapons to compensate for insecurity. He was building them because that's what you do when you're the most capable person in any room and the only outlet available is a pair of plastic toy keys and a mobile that plays Brahms' Lullaby. He was, in his way, responding to his environment with the only tools he had. And those tools just happened to include laser cannons and mind control helmets. Section 3. Peter Griffin's Buried Depths. The easiest thing in the world is to take Peter Griffin at face value. He's a big guy. He's not smart. He drinks beer. He makes terrible decisions. And the show follows the consequences of those decisions for 20-plus years. That's the premise, and it's immediately legible. But the actual Peter Griffin, the one assembled from the accumulated details of a quarter-century of storytelling, is much stranger and much sadder and much more interesting than the big lug on the surface level suggests. Start with his name, because even his name contains hidden information. His legal name, established in the episode Quagmire's Mom, is Justin Peter Griffin. Justin, not a name you would associate with this character in any intuitive way. He doesn't use it, nobody calls him that, and the show treats the revelation as a minor comedic point rather than a character-defining fact. But it suggests something about his early life that there was a version of him that existed before he became Peter, before the personality calcified into the form we know. Someone named him Justin once. Someone chose a name for this person before he became who he is. His middle name Lovenbroy was used exactly once. In the early episode Peter, Caviar Eater, the family attends a formal society gathering where Peter is called Peter Lovenbroy Griffin Sr. by someone at the event. It's never mentioned again. Lovenbroy is a German beer brand, which tells you everything you need to know about who in this family was doing the naming. His biological father, as the show eventually reveals, is an Irish drunk named Mickey McFinnigan, which completes a certain portrait, a man named after a beer brand, fathered by a functional alcoholic, who grows up to spend most of his adult life at a bar called the Drunken Clam. The lineage runs straight. The story of Peter's 2 fathers is one of the most unexpectedly moving threads in the show's early seasons. Francis Griffin, who raised Peter, was a cold, strict Irish Catholic man, deeply religious, emotionally withholding, the kind of parent whose love was present in the structure he provided, but almost never in the warmth of his expression. Peter grew up without ever fully earning his stepfather's approval, and you can see the shape of that absence in the way he parents his own children. The episode Peter's 2 Dads, which aired in Season 5, follows Peter's journey to Ireland to meet Mickey McFinnigan, his biological father. Peter wins Mickey's acceptance by out-drinking him in a competition called The Game of Drink, which involves matching shots until someone passes out. It's played for comedy, but the desperation underneath it, this grown man competing in a drinking contest for the love of a father he never knew, has a hollow, aching quality that the comedy doesn't entirely disguise. McFarlane based Mickey McFinnigan on the friends of his own father. Big, loud, opinionated Irish-American men from New England, who were full of personality and not always full of wisdom. The character is drawn with genuine affection even while being depicted as thoroughly unreliable, which is a difficult balance to strike, and the show mostly manages it. Peter, watching this charismatic, irresponsible stranger accept him as his son over the outcome of a drinking competition, the way Peter's face changes in that scene, the combination of triumph and grief is one of the most honest moments in the show's first 5 seasons. Peter is technically Mexican by birth. This is established in the episode Padre de Familia, which reveals that Thelma Griffin, Peter's mother, went to Mexico to attempt an abortion, was unsuccessful, and gave birth to Peter during the procedure before smuggling him back to Providence, Rhode Island. She raised him there, within the Roman Catholic faith, alongside Francis Griffin. Peter only finds out about his Mexican birth later in life, at which point he applies for and receives official American citizenship, the implication being that he has been living his entire life as an undocumented American, technically a Mexican national who never knew it. This is buried in a single episode and never really followed up on, but it's there in the show's canon, sitting quietly in the background of every scene where Peter acts as an archetypal American everyman. He was born in Mexico, in a botched abortion procedure, and then raised as an Irish Catholic New Englander by a woman who never told him the truth. His full employment history is another piece of his characterization that most people don't hold in their head all at once, but which tells a coherent story when you look at it together. He started at the Happy-Go-Lucky Toy Factory, working as a safety inspector. His boss, Jonathan Weed, choked to death on a dinner roll during a dinner with Peter and Lois, an accident that Peter arguably helped cause, though the episode plays it as pure bad luck. After losing that job, Peter briefly worked as a fisherman on his own boat, the SS. More powerful than Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, and the Incredible Hulk put together, which is a boat name that tells you exactly how Peter thinks about himself in moments of optimism. The boat was eventually destroyed. He then ended up working at the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery as a shipping clerk. He's been there, in that capacity, for most of the show's run, a safety inspector turned fisherman turned brewery worker, always slightly below the threshold of stability, always one bad decision away from catastrophe. The giant chicken? No conversation about Peter Griffin's hidden depths is complete without at least acknowledging the giant chicken, because the chicken is not just a recurring joke. The chicken is a philosophical statement about how Peter moves through the world. The first chicken fight happened in the Season 2 episode Da Boom, when a chicken named Ernie gave Peter a coupon that had already expired. Peter reacted to this minor social slight by engaging in a full-scale brawl with Ernie that demolished significant portions of the local environment. The fight was epic in duration, cinematic in execution, and completely disproportionate in its intensity. It was also an early signal of something that would become more extreme as the show went on. Peter's inability to de-escalate, his inability to absorb a perceived insult and move on, his instinct to meet any friction with the maximum possible force. The chicken fights became one of the show's signature recurring bits, and later installments gave Ernie an elaborate backstory and occasionally shifted the moral calculus of the feud in unexpected ways. In some iterations, Peter is clearly the aggressor. In others, there's a genuine misunderstanding at the root. In a few, the two of them are shown almost reluctantly pulled back into conflict, despite clear evidence that neither of them really wants to be doing this anymore. The chicken fights are a funhouse mirror version of Peter's relationship with conflict in general. Massive, expensive, exhausting, continuing long after any reasonable person would have walked away. There's a piece of oil in Peter's design that most viewers don't consciously notice, but which is there in every single scene. His glasses. Peter wears what appear to be thick-framed glasses, but at some point in the show's early run, the frames stop being glasses and start being something else. In later seasons and in freeze-frame analysis, it becomes clear that the lines on Peter's face that look like glasses frames are actually just lines on his face, a part of his design, rather than an accessory he's wearing. He doesn't wear glasses. He just has lines where glasses would be. This is one of those animation decisions that makes more sense from a practical standpoint. It's easier to draw him with those lines baked into his facial structure than to animate glasses consistently, but it creates a character who appears to be wearing glasses while technically not. Wearing glasses, which is the kind of detail that lodges in your brain once you've noticed it. Peter's relationship with the television set is one of the show's most consistent environmental details. The Griffin family's television is almost always on. It's present in the background of living room scenes regardless of whether the plot has anything to do with watching TV. In the earliest episodes, the specific shows visible on the television screen in the background were often real programs, which gave the writing team opportunities for tiny visual jokes that had nothing to do with the main story. A character would be having an emotional conversation in the foreground, while a completely incongruous program played silently behind them. Most viewers never looked. But those who did found an entirely parallel comedy track running underneath every scene. Peter's children's full names are a quiet showcase of how little thought he gave to naming them. Meg, whose real legal name is Megatron, changed on her birth certificate by Peter for reasons the show implies were impulsive and probably related to the Transformers cartoon, carries the most obvious evidence of his parenting approach. Chris's full name is Christopher Cross Griffin, which is also a reference to the American soft rock musician Christopher Cross, who had a brief period of enormous commercial success in the early 1980s before largely fading from mainstream attention. Peter named his son after a one-hit wonder he enjoyed for a few years in the decade before Chris was born. Stewie's middle name, Gilligan, we've already noted. The naming conventions across his three children, one named after a Transformer, one named after an obscure adult contemporary artist, and one with a middle name sourced from Gilligan's Island, form a perfect map of Peter Griffin's relationship with careful parental thought. The episode I Never Met the Dead Man, from Season 1, is the first episode to really introduce the idea of Peter Griffin having enormous destructive power. He knocks out the entire town's television signal when he crashes his car into a transmission tower, forcing the residents of the town to find other ways to occupy themselves. The episode is light and comedic, but it establishes something foundational. Peter's mistakes don't stay small. They radiate outward. The consequences of his actions aren't personal. They're civic, communal, sometimes global. In the episode where he creates his own country in his backyard, this tendency reaches its logical extreme. In the episode where he gets a job at a nuclear plant, the potential scale of what could go wrong is almost too large to process. Peter Griffin is a man whose incompetence operates at the level of infrastructure. He was nominated for a Kennedy Award for Safety in the Workplace at the Toy Factory, an award he won by cheating, though the cheating itself was done with such magnificent confidence that the line between cheating and performance becomes genuinely blurry. He has been arrested multiple times for acts of public destruction, trespass, and violence, though the show's episodic reset structure ensures that none of these have lasting legal consequences. He started his own religion in one episode. He briefly controlled a television network in another. He became a country music star, a fisherman, a mascot for a beer brand, a mime, a knight, a fighter, a spy. The range of occupations and identities Peter Griffin has passed through over 25 years is staggering, and the reason it never feels discontinuous is that all of these versions of Peter share the same fundamental trait. He is a man who encounters the world with a combination of complete confidence and zero preparation, and the show follows the gap between what he expects and what happens. The specific voice performance MacFarlane gives Peter contains a detail that becomes more noticeable once you've been told about it. Peter has what is described as a Rhode Island and Eastern Massachusetts accent, which shares certain phonetic qualities with the Boston accent but has its own distinct character. MacFarlane modeled it on Paul Timmins, the security guard, and on the general class of big, vocal, opinionated New England Irish Catholics that he encountered and observed while studying at RISD. The voice has warmth in it, even when the character is at his worst. There is something in the timbre, some quality of being genuinely delighted by small things, of finding the world fundamentally funny that keeps the character from becoming entirely unlikable, even when his behavior is at its most chaotic. There's also the matter of Peter's intelligence, which the show treats inconsistently across its run, but which has some genuinely interesting benchmarks established in the early seasons. In the episode Petarded from Season 4, Peter takes a special education assessment and is officially diagnosed as legally retarded, a measure of low intelligence that the show uses for an extended joke, but which also, technically, establishes a canonical IQ floor for the character. This became somewhat controversial over time, both because of how the show depicted intellectual disability and because the established diagnosis didn't stop Peter from periodically demonstrating situational competence that would be hard to explain by that standard. The show's answer, essentially, is that Peter is whatever the episode needs him to be, and the petarded diagnosis became one of the many canonical facts that subsequent episodes periodically acknowledged and then quietly set aside. One last hidden depth. Peter's mother Thelma was voiced by Florence Stanley until Stanley's death in 2003, and then by Carol Kane from the fourth season onward. The transition was handled with the gentlest possible continuity. The character's voice changed, but no explanation was offered within the show's universe, and the character continued to appear regularly. Thelma Griffin as a character has her own buried sadnesses, including the revelation that she harbored deep resentment toward Francis Griffin for years and had the affair that produced Peter partly as a response to that unhappiness. The family Peter came from was not a warm one. The distance he sometimes struggles to close with his own children mirrors a distance that was never fully closed with him. Section 4. Brian Griffin's Hidden Story. Brian Edward Griffin is 10 years old in dog years when the show begins, which translates to approximately 70 in human terms. Seth MacFarlane confirmed this in early interviews, meaning that the character who reads as the young, sophisticated intellectual of the Griffin household is, in the chronology of canine aging, older than Peter by a significant margin. It's a detail the show never foregrounds and never really builds on, but it's sitting there underneath every scene, quietly inverting the power dynamics of the household. The dog is the elder statesman. He's also the most emotionally intelligent person in the room, by nearly any measure, and the show spends a lot of time exploring what it means to have intelligence without the infrastructure to fully act on it. Brian is a white Labrador Retriever, a color that doesn't exist in the standard American Kennel Club classification as a standalone category, since white labs are technically a very pale variation within the yellow classification. In real life, this coloring is rare and sometimes associated with reduced melanin production, which is a detail that has no narrative significance in Family Guy, but which makes Brian's visual design quietly unusual, even by the standards of animal coloring. He was picked up by Peter as a stray, as established in the episode Brian, Portrait of a Dog in Season 1. Except that this directly contradicts the episode The Man with Two Brians from Season 7, in which Brian shows the family home videos of himself as a puppy already living in the Griffin house, which would mean he was never a stray, he was born into the family. The show doesn't reconcile these two accounts. They exist in parallel contradiction. His education is a recurring thread. He attended Brown University, one of the Ivy League schools in Providence, Rhode Island, which gives his residency in the area a certain ironic circularity. The town where he lives is also home to the university that most shaped his intellectual identity. He has repeatedly attempted to return to Brown to finish his degree, and the show uses this aspiration as a source of comedy, but also as a kind of poignant ongoing theme. He is a dog who wants the credentials of a formal education, not because the education would teach him anything he doesn't already know, but because the credential would signal to the world that he deserves to be taken seriously. That distinction between actual competence and social legitimacy is one of Brian's defining tensions. The novel he has been writing for years is another. Brian talks about his novel constantly in the early seasons. He's been working on it for years. It's always almost finished. It's always the thing that will finally establish him as the serious writer he knows himself to be. When the novel is finally published in a later season, it receives terrible reviews. Stewie reads it and delivers a point-by-point demolition of its weaknesses. Brian is devastated. The trajectory of this storyline is one of the show's most unflinching depictions of the gap between self-perception and external reality, not played for cruelty, at its best, but for the specific kind of sadness that comes from watching someone encounter the limits of their own gift. MacFarlane has been clear that Brian's voice is his own natural speaking voice, with a slight elevation in what he describes as smarminess, a quality he deliberately calibrated to suggest that Brian thinks more highly of himself than his circumstances entirely warrant. This is a small, specific choice that does an enormous amount of characterization work. Listen for it next time you watch an early episode. There's a smoothness to the way Brian delivers certain lines, a sense that he considers his own opinions particularly valuable, that sits just barely on the near side of self-satisfaction. It gives him charm and slight irritation in equal measure, which is exactly the right recipe for a character you're supposed to find both endearing and occasionally exasperating. The martini is Brian's drink. Not beer, not wine, not whiskey martini. In the early seasons, this was a specific shorthand for his aspirational cultural identity. The martini is a drink associated with a certain mid-century American sophistication, the Rat Pack era, the world of Cary Grant films, and the Algonquin Round Table. Brian drinks martinis because he has a very clear picture of who he wants to be, and that person is suave and urbane and confident and slightly literary. And in 1999, a gin martini was the clearest possible signal of all those qualities in a single glass. The fact that he drinks considerably more than is healthy is present in the early seasons as a character flaw handled with some care. He's not a raging alcoholic. He's a social drinker who leans too heavily on the social part. In later seasons, his drinking escalates noticeably, and the show treats it with less nuance. But in the early run, it functions as a humanizing detail rather than a punchline. Brian's relationship with Lois is never fully resolved, which is part of what makes it work. He has feelings for her that are clearly genuine, not just physical attraction, though that's present too, but something more like recognition, the sense of encountering someone who operates at a similar register of intelligence and emotional awareness in a household otherwise dominated by chaos and stupidity. He doesn't act on these feelings in any sustained way, and in the early seasons, the show handles his suppressed love for Lois with genuine delicacy. He admires her. He occasionally allows himself a moment of pure feeling when she's particularly beautiful or kind or perceptive, and then he puts it away and goes back to being Peter's best friend and the family's voice of reason, because those roles are available to him and the role of Lois's love interest is not. The son Brian never knew about Dylan Flanagan, whose mother was a woman Brian dated briefly before the start of the series appears in the episode The Former Life of Brian from Season 6. Dylan is a teenager when Brian finds him, which would mean Brian fathered a child when Dylan's mother, Tracy Flanagan, was also very young. The episode follows Brian's attempt to reconnect with his son, build a relationship, and then let go when he realizes that what Dylan needs is stability, which Brian, at this point in his life, cannot provide. It's a quietly mature episode that handles the theme of parental responsibility with more care than the show typically gave to its more emotional storylines. Dylan never returned as a regular character, which fits the show's general approach to consequences. Things happen, they have emotional weight in the moment, and then they recede. The literary influences the show assigns to Brian are real influences that MacFarlane and the writing staff cared about. Brian name-drops Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Faulkner, and Kerouac with some regularity in early seasons. He reads actual books. You can sometimes see the spines if you freeze-frame certain scenes. His copy of Catcher in the Rye appears in at least one episode. The New Yorker is his magazine of choice. He is, in other words, the kind of literary person who has very specific and somewhat predictable taste, which is itself a kind of characterization. He reveres the American literary canon as it existed mid-20th century, without necessarily engaging with the more challenging or less accessible corners of that tradition. He likes the books that smart people are supposed to like. His intelligence is genuine, but his range has limits, and those limits are visible in what he chooses to admire. There's a recurring background detail across multiple seasons that involved Brian's car. He drives a Toyota Prius in later episodes, which the show uses explicitly as a character signal. Quagmire's famous speech against Brian in the episode Jerome is the New Black includes the line about the Prius specifically, using it as evidence of Brian's performative environmental virtue. The joke is that Brian uses the Prius not because he has thought carefully about his carbon footprint, but because driving a Prius is something that Brian Griffin, intellectual dog and sophisticate, would do. It's a prop in his self-presentation rather than a genuine ethical commitment. The show is more perceptive about this kind of performed virtue in that single exchange than many longer treatments of the same theme. Brian's backstory includes a mother, Biscuit, who was taken from him when she was hit by a car. A loss. The show references rarely but with genuine feeling when it does. The episode Brian, Portrait of a Dog, touches on this by showing Brian's attachment to the Griffin family as partly a response to his own family's violent disruption. He found stability in this chaotic household because it was the closest thing to permanence that had been available to him. That backstory gives his loyalty to Peter, which sometimes strains credibility given Peter's behavior, an emotional foundation that isn't entirely about Peter's virtues. It's about Brian needing a family and Peter being the person who offered to provide one. The death and resurrection storyline from Season 12 has a factual dimension that's worth understanding fully. Brian was hit by a car in the episode Life of Brian, which aired on the 24th of November 2013. The death was treated as permanent within the episode. There was a funeral, Stewie was genuinely devastated, and a new dog named Vinny was introduced to fill the emotional space. The episode sparked an enormous public reaction. A petition to bring Brian back gathered tens of thousands of signatures within days. The death trended on social media for a week. National news outlets covered the story. Then, 2 episodes later, on the 15th of December 2013, the episode Christmas Guy aired, in which Stewie uses a time travel remote control to go back in time and prevent Brian from being struck. Brian returned to life. Vinny was never mentioned again. MacFarlane later addressed this in interviews, indicating that the death was always intended to be temporary and that the restoration was planned from the beginning. Whether this means the outpouring of public emotion was anticipated and deliberately engineered, or whether the timeline of events was genuinely as planned regardless of audience reaction, is an open question. What isn't an open question is the effect. Family Guy put on international news for killing a cartoon dog, then walked it back in 3 weeks. The whole cycle told a very clear story about what the show understood about its own audience and what it was willing to do with that understanding. There is one last hidden layer in Brian's character that deserves a quiet mention because it reframes almost everything else. MacFarlane has said in multiple interviews across the show's run that Brian is his favorite character, the one he feels most comfortable voicing, the one he feels most personally connected to, the struggling writer who can't finish his novel, the intellectual who drinks too much, the romantic who can't quite land the love he's looking for, the voice of reason in a household that largely ignores reason. MacFarlane built a version of his own anxieties and aspirations into a white Labrador retriever, and then spent 25 years performing that version of himself in the recording booth. Brian Griffin is not just a character. He's a self-portrait at one remove, filtered through fur and irony, and a carefully calibrated smarminess turned just barely past the dial's center point. Section 5. The Quagmire Rabbit Hole. Glenn Quagmire is on the surface the simplest character in Family Guy's main cast. He's defined by a single overwhelming trait and a single-word catchphrase that became one of the most widely recognized verbal tics in all of animated television. But underneath the red Hawaiian shirt and the exaggerated chin, Glenn Quagmire has one of the most densely detailed and quietly bizarre backstories of any supporting character in the show's history. His legal name is Glenn Quagmire, but his birth name was Glenn Quagglechek, a name he changed at some point, the reasons for which are never explored. The surname change speaks to a character who, somewhere in his past, made a deliberate decision to reshape his public identity. The name Quagglechek, with its Eastern European tonal quality, hints at an immigrant heritage that's never formally examined. Quagmire is described across various episodes as being of European-American and Polish-American descent, which gives the surname change a slightly more legible context. Someone rationalizing an anglicization for professional or social reasons, decades before the events of the show. His actual age is one of the show's best hidden facts. He appears young. The design gives him a kind of timeless, almost cartoon vintage quality, with his slicked-back dark hair and his 1950s inflected silhouette. But in the episode Foxy Lady from Season 8, his driver's license is shown on screen for a moment, and it lists his age as 61. He is old enough to be Peter's father. He has maintained a youthful appearance by eating carrots daily, which the show confirms in the same episode, though whether this is meant to be taken literally or as another gag layered into an already gag-dense show is left pleasantly ambiguous. The backstory the show builds around his military career is more detailed than the comedy usually requires. He is a former ensign in the United States Navy, and it was in the Navy that he first met Peter Griffin, the origin of their friendship, given a clean institutional explanation that places both characters at a specific point in their early adult lives. He served for a period that the show implies was significant enough to shape his worldview, and several episodes reference specific naval deployments and experiences that fill in the outline of who he was before we met him. His current career as a commercial airline pilot is consistent with this military aviation background, giving him professional competence that sits in interesting contrast to his personal life. The original character inspiration is something MacFarlane described directly. He wanted Quagmire to feel like a guy who got frozen in time somewhere around the Rat Pack era, not the 1950s exactly, but the early 1960s Las Vegas lounge culture universe of Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra, where a certain kind of charm was considered the primary social currency, and the word giggity would have fit right in as a period-appropriate expression of appreciation. The catchphrase itself, giggity, is one of the show's most durable cultural exports, immediately recognizable even to people who have never watched the show. It functions as a kind of verbal shorthand for a very specific attitude toward the world, an enthusiasm so uncomplicated it bypasses self-awareness entirely. Quagmire doesn't second-guess his enthusiasms. He announces them. His relationship with Brian Griffin is one of the show's most philosophically interesting character dynamics because it's built on a foundation of genuine contempt that is also, somehow, completely accurate. In the episode Jerome is the New Black from Season 8, Quagmire delivers what has become known among fans simply as the speech, a multi-paragraph, itemized indictment of Brian's character that covers his intellectual pretensions, his romantic irresponsibility, his abandoned son, his failed writing career, his hypocrisy, and his persistent pursuit of Lois. Every single item in the speech is supported by specific on-screen evidence from prior episodes. This isn't Quagmire making unfair accusations. This is a character who has been paying attention. What makes the speech so strange is who's delivering it. Glenn Quagmire, by his own behavior across 8 seasons, is not someone positioned to claim moral authority over anyone. He has done things that are far worse, by any objective measure, than Brian's worst behavior. But Quagmire isn't claiming moral superiority. He's claiming observational accuracy. He can see Brian clearly, precisely because he isn't trying to present himself as better. He's one of the few characters in the show who delivers devastating criticism from a place of explicit self-awareness about his own failings, and the combination produces something that registers as genuinely honest rather than hypocritical. The relationship Quagmire had with Cheryl Tiegs, the real-life model who appears in the show as herself and represents the one woman Quagmire ever truly loved before she left him, is the show's most significant. Treatment of his emotional interior. He pursues women with a relentlessness that the show mostly plays as comic exaggeration, but the Cheryl Tiegs episodes reveal that underneath the pursuit is a specific and unresolved grief. He knows what it felt like to love someone genuinely. He knows what it felt like to lose her. Every subsequent conquest is, at some level, the gap between that specific loss and the present moment. His cat James appears in the episode 420 from Season 7, and Quagmire's devotion to the cat is one of the show's most surprising character details. He carries James everywhere. He makes his friends sign birthday cards for the cat. He is, toward James, tender and attentive in ways that he is toward nothing else in his life. The joke is the contrast, the sexually voracious airline pilot who gets weirdly emotional about his cat, but the character note is real. Quagmire is capable of deep, uncomplicated affection. He just usually reserves it for animals and the memory of Cheryl Tiegs. The father storyline is one of the show's boldest uses of the Quagmire character. The episode Quagmire's Dad from Season 8 reveals that Quagmire's father Dan is a transgender woman named Ida Davis, who had gender confirmation surgery at age 61. The episode navigates this storyline imperfectly. Brian's reaction, in particular, drew significant criticism because it plays his revulsion for comedy in ways the show doesn't adequately complicate, but the Quagmire, half of the episode is handled with more sincerity. His struggle to reconcile the father he knew with the woman in front of him, his eventual acceptance driven by love rather than understanding, and his defense of Ida against Brian's cruelty at the end are moments that treat the character as someone capable of genuine growth. His sister Brenda appears in the episode Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q from Season 10, an episode that tackled domestic violence with an unusual degree of seriousness for this show. Brenda is in an abusive relationship with a man named Jeff, and the episode follows Quagmire's attempt to help her leave. The episode is imperfect and has been criticized for how it handles the resolution, but Quagmire's love for his sister is never in question. He is protective of her in a way that reveals the extent to which his surface character is exactly that surface. He uses his brother Glenn energy in a register entirely different from his usual presentation. One of the most widely missed visual gags in the show's history involves Quagmire's house. He lives at 29 Spooner Street, the address shared with the Griffin family, whose house is also at that number on the same street, which means they are technically neighbors in some ambiguous shared address arrangement that the show never explains. More than that, various episodes have shown his house to contain doors and rooms that shouldn't physically fit within the exterior dimensions of the building. His house is bigger on the inside than outside by a significant margin, which is either a casual animation inconsistency or a very committed Easter egg suggesting that Quagmire, like the Doctor from Doctor Who, inhabits a dimensional anomaly. Given the amount of equipment and people that various episodes have implied pass through that house, a TARDIS-like spatial irregularity might be the only explanation that makes physical sense. The name Glenn itself has a specifically interesting origin within the context of how McFarlane built the character. Glenn is phonetically smooth, slightly old-fashioned, with a quality of being almost aggressively pleasant. It's a name that sounds nothing like the character's behavior, which is part of its comedic utility. You hear the name Glenn and you picture someone in a sweater vest, possibly a dentist, definitely reliable. Then you meet Glenn Quagmire, and you realize that sometimes a name tells you exactly nothing. Section 6. Animation Secrets and Visual Easter Eggs. Family Guy exists in a specific visual tradition that it has both honored and subverted across its run, and the show's relationship with its own visual language is one of the most rewarding things to understand if you want to see the Easter eggs that are hiding in plain sight in almost every episode. The sheet music visible above Lois's piano in the opening sequence is actual sheet music. If you zoom in, and in the HD era this is entirely possible, you can see that the notes printed on those pages are the actual notated melody of the Family Guy theme song. The show's opening sequence begins with Lois at the piano, and the music on her stand is the exact piece she's playing. It's a layered joke about a joke, the show's theme song being performed as diegetic music within the show's world, with the notation proving it's not just there as generic background decoration. The opening credits sequence itself has changed multiple times across the show's run, and each version contains its own set of details. In the original opening from seasons 1 and 2, the family characters who appeared dancing in the background were generic figures rather than fully developed secondary characters. Starting in Season 4, the updated animation produced by Sunwoo Entertainment replaced those generics with actual recurring characters from the show. If you compare the two versions carefully, you can identify which characters were considered important enough to graduate from extras to featured background dancers. The carpet color in the Griffin living room also changed between versions, going from a different shade to the particular color of carpet you see in most episodes from the mid-run onward. The pictures on the wall during the piano segment evolved from paint blobs in early seasons to actual drawn images that reward closer examination. Stewie's lyric during the opening theme is one of the show's longest-running soft mysteries. In the original version of the credits, Stewie sings a line that many viewers heard as "effin' cry," rather than the intended laugh and cry. The sound design in those early seasons was apparently muddy enough in that specific moment that the less charitable interpretation was genuinely ambiguous. The Season 3 version of the credits re-recorded the line to make the clean version clearer, but by that point the effin' cry reading had taken on a life of its own as a piece of fan mythology. The Facebook gag in one of the episodes from around Season 9 is the kind of visual joke that lives entirely in a freeze frame. In a scene where Lois is using Facebook, the page is shown for exactly long enough that you can read it if you pause the episode. Meg has sent Lois a friend request. The request is pending. Lois has not accepted it. The tragedy of Meg Griffin's family relationships, condensed into a single line of interface text, sitting in the background of a scene that has nothing to do with Meg. The upside-down wall message in one episode is another example of the show hiding jokes in places the moving image hides. In a specific background shot, the episode has been tracked by eagle-eyed fans. There is text written on a wall that reads, "If you can read this, your TV is upside down." The text is displayed upside down, so reading it requires either pausing and rotating your perspective or having extremely good spatial orientation. There is no narrative explanation. It is simply there. In the Simpsons crossover episode The Simpsons Guy from 2014, the animation details contain a specific, subtle joke for anyone paying close attention. When the Griffin characters appear in Springfield, Their eyes look subtly different from their usual appearance, slightly dimmer, less saturated, as if they're slightly out of their element in Springfield's visual universe. The effect is subtle enough that most viewers wouldn't consciously register it, but it's a genuine artistic decision. The Family Guy characters were drawn as slightly off when rendered in The Simpsons world, suggesting that the visual rules of Springfield don't quite fit them. The newspaper headline Easter egg from the episode Model Misbehavior is one of the show's most often cited examples of self-aware visual comedy. In the scene, the Griffin family has won a boat race, and their picture appears on the front page of a local newspaper. The main headline reads something about the Griffins' victory, but a smaller headline below, visible only if you pause the image, reads, DVDs paused for headline joke millions disappointed. The show is acknowledging its own Easter egg infrastructure, the practice of hiding jokes in freeze-frame details that only exist to reward people who pause the playback and then undercutting the reward with a joke, about the disappointment of finding the meta comment rather than an actual joke. It's a joke about jokes about jokes. The Jesus license plate in the episode North by North Quahog is another small moment that rewards attention. When Jesus appears in the episode, briefly, his car has a license plate reading WWID, What Would I Do? An obvious and charming variation on the WWJD, What Would Jesus Do? Bracelets and bumper stickers that were extremely popular in American evangelical culture in the late 1990s and early 2000s. The show places this on Jesus' own car, which means Jesus is asking himself the question in the third person, which is either deeply self-reflective or slightly absurd. The license plate is on screen for a matter of seconds. Most viewers never see it. The giant chicken's name is Ernie. This is established in the early chicken fight episodes and maintained throughout subsequent iterations of the bit. But because the character is so thoroughly identified by what he is, rather than who he is, the name tends to get lost. Ernie is a domesticated production animal involved in one of the most elaborate revenge escalation cycles in animated television, and he has a name that you would give to a golden retriever or a kindergartner. The animation studio changes across the show's history left visible traces in the episodes themselves, which dedicated fans have tracked obsessively. Rough Draft Studios, which handled seasons 2 and 3, gave the characters a looser, slightly more elastic quality. The characters felt slightly more alive in their physical comedy because the movement had more give to it. Later studios introduced varying degrees of stiffness. The outlines changed. The weight of the characters changed subtly. In some episodes, the characters' proportions vary slightly from their standard model sheets, giving attentive viewers the experience of watching a character who seems slightly wrong without being able to identify exactly what has changed. The show went widescreen in Season 8, shifting from the 4:3 aspect ratio of its early years to the 16:9 widescreen format. This meant that the animation team had to redesign all the existing background environments to accommodate the wider field of view. The Griffin House layout changed to reflect this expanded visual space, and careful comparison of early season and later season interior shots reveals that the house's geography is slightly different. Rooms that were on one side in Season 2 are on a different side in Season 10. Hallways lead to different places. The staircase configuration changed. The show's house has no consistent floor plan, which is either a continuity failure or an implicit joke about the nature of suburban domestic space. The Drunken Clam, where Peter and his friends spend most of their social time, has its own set of visual details that reward freeze-frame analysis. The bar's walls are decorated with an evolving collection of signs, photos, and objects that change slightly from season to season. In some episodes, news articles visible on the walls reference events from the show's history. In others, the decor includes items that have no explanation within the show's universe, as if the bar's owner has a collection that spans categories nobody asked about. The show made a deliberate choice in early seasons to keep the backgrounds of certain recurring locations populated with extras whose faces are visible if you look. The faces are sometimes familiar: writers' faces, production crew, occasional celebrity cameos that never announce themselves, just faces in a crowd, visible for a few frames, doing nothing to draw attention to themselves. The episode where Meg becomes a junior news anchor contains, visible in the background of the newsroom set, a figure who is clearly James Woods dressed as Peter Griffin, being followed by a camera crew. James Woods had already appeared as a prominent guest character in other episodes of the show, and the background appearance is completely unexplained within the scene. He's just there, being James Woods in Peter's clothes, while the main scene unfolds in the foreground. The show's Star Wars parody episodes Blue Harvest, Something 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 Dark Side, and It's a Trap contain an extraordinary density of visual Easter eggs aimed specifically at Star Wars fans. Details from the original trilogy are reproduced and then modified in ways that are only visible if you know the original material well. Specific shot compositions from the films are replicated almost frame for frame, with the Family Guy characters substituted into the positions of the original characters, and then additional visual details are added in the background that have nothing to do with either Star Wars or Family Guy pure visual jokes addressed to no one in particular, existing only to be found by whoever happens to look. The Road to Episodes, the musical adventure episodes that pair Brian and Stewie in extended adventures inspired by the old Bob Hope and Bing Crosby road movies, have a consistent visual signature that references the black and white aesthetic of those 1940s films. The opening of each Road to Episode uses a specific credit style, a font that evokes classic Hollywood, and an orchestral overture playing over it that references the specific era of music associated with Hope and Crosby. These sequences are impeccably rendered, which is part of what makes them land. The show is not approximating the aesthetic, it's actually occupying it. Section 7. The real people behind the show. One of the most interesting things about the Family Guy universe is how consistently it maps onto real people and real experiences that most viewers have no way of knowing about. Seth MacFarlane built the show from observed life, and the traces of those observations are embedded in the characters in ways that become visible when you know where to look. Peter Griffin's speaking voice, as established in earlier sections, was modeled on a security guard named Paul Timmons at the Rhode Island School of Design. Timmons' particular accent and vocal quality gave MacFarlane something specific to work with, not a generalized regional accent, but a specific person's way of moving through a sentence. This is a more significant creative choice than it might initially appear, because a general regional accent tends toward abstraction, toward a composite impression of a place. A specific person's voice is grounded in one individual's history, one individual's emotional range, one individual's idiosyncratic relationship with sound. Peter Griffin talking is Paul Timmons talking, filtered through MacFarlane's specific memory of a specific man's specific voice. Every time Peter Griffin is on screen and speaking, there's a real person in there somewhere. Lois Griffin was modeled in part on a composite of strong, intelligent, emotionally resourceful women from the New England upper middle class. The kind of background that produces women who are simultaneously very capable and very aware of the gap between their capabilities and how much of those capabilities they're actually able to deploy in the context of their life. MacFarlane has described Lois's background, old money family, piano instruction, marrying down for love as drawing on an archetype he encountered in studying the social dynamics of Rhode Island, where the class geography is unusual for such a small state. Alex Borstein, who voices Lois, brings her own sensibility to the character, and the voice Borstein uses is partially modeled on an impression she developed of a Jewish relative, which gives the accent its particular quality of warmth, crossed with mild exasperation. The real Adam West played Mayor Adam West on Family Guy across many seasons. The casting of the actual Adam West, who had played Batman in the original 1966 television series and spent decades in the shadow of that role before finding a second, Stranger Life as the beloved eccentric mayor of a fictional Rhode Island town, is one of the show's best choices. West was famously good-natured about his own cultural legacy, and the Mayor Adam West character on Family Guy gave him a recurring role that allowed him to lean into the absurdity with full enthusiasm. He died on the 9th of June 2017 at the age of 88. The show wrote a tribute episode for his character that aired in the 2018 season, handling the character's death with the gentleness it warranted. His scenes on Family Guy are among the show's most warmly comic, because West understood that the joke and the man were not entirely separate, and he played both with grace. Carrie Fisher voiced Peter's boss Angela at the brewery across multiple seasons. Fisher brought a very specific edge to the role, a combination of sardonic authority and human warmth that was entirely her own, and her presence in the recurring cast gave a character who might have been a generic workplace antagonist an unexpected emotional texture. Fisher died on the 28th of December 2016, 2 days after suffering a cardiac arrest on an aircraft. The timing was devastating, and the show chose not to recast the character. Angela was retired with dignity. The show has hosted an extraordinary range of celebrity voice, guest performances across its history, and some of the most interesting are the ones where the celebrity played some version of themselves rather than a separate character. James Woods' appearances on the show are a specific case study. Woods played himself across multiple episodes, a self-caricature of the intense, sometimes volatile Hollywood actor, appearing in the fictional world of the show as a recognizable public figure, behaving in ways that are just slightly too extreme to be genuinely biographical. The show's treatment of Woods, obsessive, easily manipulated by candy, prone to dramatic and unpredictable behavior, was something he apparently embraced and participated in enthusiastically for several seasons before his political views shifted in ways that put him out of alignment with MacFarlane, the writing staff. His later appearances on the show are notably different in tone from his earlier ones. The real Rush Limbaugh, the conservative radio host, appeared on Family Guy as himself in the episode Excellence in Broadcasting, which is one of the show's most genuinely surprising casting moments, given MacFarlane's very public political differences with Limbaugh. The episode follows Brian becoming a conservative after spending time with Rush Limbaugh, something that, if you know anything about either MacFarlane or Limbaugh, is about as unexpected a premise as the show ever attempted. Limbaugh's participation in this episode required a willingness to be parodied from the inside, which he apparently found either funny or useful or both. Seth MacFarlane's own personal experiences are scattered through the show in ways that range from obvious to very well hidden. His near miss with American Airlines Flight 111 on the 11th of September 2001, established in the first section of this script, has been referenced in a few interviews but was not, to the show's credit, made into a storyline. The near-death experience was real and private and never converted into content. What did make it into content was the anxiety and gallows humor and black comedy that characterized the show's relationship with mortality in its better episodes. MacFarlane has described his sense of humor as rooted in an acute awareness of how fast things can change, and the September 11 experience informed that awareness in the most direct way possible. His time working at Hanna-Barbera on Johnny Bravo, Cow and Chicken, and Dexter's Laboratory left visible traces in Family Guy's visual style and comedic approach. The Hanna-Barbera house-style clean outlines, simple backgrounds, physical comedy that relies on impact and reaction rather than sustained naturalism is in the DNA of Family Guy's visual grammar, even as the show developed its own distinct aesthetic. MacFarlane absorbed the principles of that tradition while he was in it, and even though Family Guy was explicitly designed to occupy a different cultural space than children's animation, the foundational grammar is recognizable. The episode If I'm Dying, I'm Lying from Season 2 contains one of the show's most personal hidden Easter eggs. In this episode, Peter is given the opportunity to bring back any canceled television show, and he selects Gumball 2 Gumball, a fictional program about two NBC Today show hosts named Gumball going on adventures together. Gumball 2. Gumball is also the name of the first project MacFarlane actually pitched to Fox, the one that preceded Family Guy in his development pipeline and was never made. He named the fictional show within a show after his own failed first pitch. It's a joke that only people who knew MacFarlane's development history would catch, and the show buries it inside an already absurdist premise with such confidence that it barely registers as the personal joke it is. Walter Murphy composed the show's score across its run. Murphy was the right choice for Family Guy in ways that go beyond general competence. His background was in big band orchestration and classical arrangement, which gave the show's musical underlayer a quality of breadth and sophistication that the animation content would not necessarily have demanded. When Family Guy deploys a full orchestral score in an emotional scene, it usually lands because Murphy understood how to write music that worked both as straight emotional support and as gentle parody of the conventions of that support. The show's music knows when to play it straight and when to wink. Murphy was essential to that calibration. Ron Jones scored the first 4 seasons before being dismissed by Fox in a decision that remains controversial among fans. Jones's work on those early seasons, particularly his approach to Stewie's villainous moments, where he used genuine horror film orchestration to score a 1-year-old baby's schemes, was one of the show's most distinctive creative choices. Fox reportedly felt his music was too good, which is one of the stranger creative notes in the history of a broadcast network. The decision to replace his lush, dramatically aware scoring with something more conventional is often cited as one of the invisible quality shifts between the first era and the revival. Section 8. Deleted scenes, lost episodes, and what almost was. The history of Family Guy contains a remarkable number of stories about things that were built and then never used, scenes that were cut, episodes that almost existed, and creative decisions that pointed in entirely different directions before the show settled into the form it actually took. The unaired pilot is the most significant example. Before Death Has a Shadow aired as the first broadcast episode in January 1999, MacFarlane had produced a different 15-minute pilot for the Fox pitch meeting. This pilot exists and has circulated among collectors and dedicated fans, and comparing it to the broadcast episodes reveals both how close the show was to its final form from the very beginning, and also where significant adjustments were made between pitch and production. The character designs are recognizable, but slightly different proportions are off in specific ways. The animation has a rougher quality consistent with a fast-produced pitch reel, and some of the character voices are not quite settled into their final register. Stewie, in particular, sounds slightly different, as if MacFarlane was still feeling his way toward the precise calibration of the character. Several completed episodes were held back or delayed across the show's run, for reasons that range from sensitivity concerns to scheduling decisions to the aftermath of real-world events. The episode Partial Terms of Endearment, in which Lois agrees to serve as a surrogate mother, was produced for Season 8 but never aired on Fox. The network found the episode's treatment of surrogacy and abortion too controversial for broadcast and declined to include it in the season order. The episode aired in the United Kingdom and was later released on home video in the United States, where it became something of a collector's item for fans who wanted the complete record of the show's production. The episode is competently made and unremarkable by the standards of Family Guy's more provocative moments, which makes the decision not to air it feel in retrospect more like a business decision than a creative one. The episode Turban Cowboy from Season 11 occupied an unusual position in the show's history because of its timing relative to real events. The episode, which features a cutaway depicting Peter driving a car through the Boston Marathon and inadvertently helping a character connected to a bombing plot, aired on the 17th of March, 2013. On the 15th of April, 2013, less than a month later, 2 bombs were detonated near the finish line of the actual Boston Marathon, killing 3 people and injuring hundreds more. Fox immediately pulled the episode from Hulu and the show's online presence, and it was not aired in repeats. The episode's content had no predictive intention and no meaningful similarity to the actual event. The cutaway was about a generic bombing plot and was played for comedy in a way that couldn't be mapped onto the specific tragedy that followed. But the timing was impossible to ignore, and the network made the decision to keep the episode dark out of respect for the victims. The Kevin Spacey episodes are another category of content that became historically complicated after the fact. In an early episode, a joke was made referencing Kevin Spacey in a way that, after the public revelations about Spacey's behavior in 2017, appeared uncomfortably prescient. MacFarlane was explicit in interviews that neither he nor the writers had any knowledge of Spacey's actual behavior. The joke was written randomly, as a piece of absurdist comedy with no biographical basis. But the timing of how the joke read in retrospect, combined with MacFarlane's public response to the Spacey revelations, created a strange recursive situation where the show appeared to have anticipated something it couldn't have known. Brian's original death in Season 12 was not the first time the writers considered killing a main character. MacFarlane has acknowledged in various interviews that the question of permanent character consequences, what it would mean to actually change the show's cast in an irreversible way, had been discussed internally at multiple points in the show's run. The revival after the first cancellation had established that the show was capable of resurrection in a literal production sense. The question of whether specific characters could die permanently, whether the show had the courage of its occasional dramatic convictions, was one that the writing room returned to periodically. Brian's death and return is the clearest expression of that conversation, and the speed of the resurrection told its own story about where the writing room ultimately came down on the question of permanent consequences. There are at least 2 full episodes that were written and scripted but never produced, referenced in interviews and commentary tracks without the full details being revealed. One involves a storyline centered on Meg that would have provided her character with a significant amount of agency and development. The episode was apparently abandoned mid-production, and its components were cannibalized for other episodes. Another involves a storyline set around the drunken clam that was pulled for reasons related to the guest casting for that episode falling through, leaving a completed script with no suitable voice performance for a central character. The direct-to-DVD movie Stewie Griffin, The Untold Story, released in 2005, contains extended versions of storylines that were either cut down or altered for the broadcast versions that some of its content was derived from. The DVD movie was structured as 3 connected episodes: Stewie B, Good, Bango Was His Name-O, and Stu and Stewie's Excellent Adventure that were later edited into a feature-length format. The feature version contains scenes and dialogue that never made it to the broadcast episodes, including extended sequences in which Stewie confronts his adult self in the future timeline. These extended sequences give the future Stewie character considerably more depth and make the emotional stakes of the story considerably more affecting. The broadcast versions cut most of this, leaving the feature film as the definitive version of the story. The Conway-Twitty gags, the extended, unedited Conway-Twitty song performances that would occasionally replace actual jokes in the show, have a production history that's worth understanding. MacFarlane has explained that these were deployed specifically when an episode came in short on runtime and the writing team didn't have enough additional material to fill the gap. Rather than writing filler comedy, the team made the choice to lean into the formal disruption of an extended musical performance, turning the flaw into a feature. The first Conway-Twitty appearance was apparently received well enough by the production team that it became a recurring option when episodes were running short. By the time it appeared for the 3rd or 4th time, it had become a genuine symbol of how far the show was willing to push the audience's patience, and the divided reaction it produced in viewers tracked almost exactly with the broader divided reaction to the show's later seasons. There are numerous episodes across the show's history where a scene was completed in animation, included in the production cut, and then removed at the final edit stage for reasons that range from timing to content concerns to simple quality judgments. DVD special features and commentary tracks occasionally reveal these excised scenes, and they collectively form a kind of shadow history of the show, a version of Family Guy that was almost but not quite the version that aired, with slightly different emphases and slightly different edges. The gap between what was made and what was broadcast is one of the more interesting documents of the show's creative process. Section 9. The Crossover Universe and Hidden Connections. Family Guy exists within a shared creative universe that is more extensive and more carefully maintained than most casual viewers realize. The connections between Family Guy, American Dad, The Cleveland Show, and occasionally The Simpsons create a kind of animated multiverse that the show has explored, referenced, and meta-commented on in ways that reward tracking across all the individual series. The American Dad connections begin before American Dad even existed as a separate show. MacFarlane has described the 2 series as occupying different corners of the same creative universe, which is why the casual cameos and crossover appearances feel natural rather than forced. When Stan Smith and Deputy Bullock appear at the CIA headquarters during the second part of the Stewie Kills Lois, Lois Kills Stewie 2-parter from Season 6, they appear without announcement or explanation, as if 2 CIA agents from another show happening to be at the same location is entirely unremarkable. Stewie, in that scene, actually mistakes Stan Smith for Joe Swanson, a joke about how 2 characters from different shows, designed by the same creator, can share certain design qualities that a 1-year-old baby might not be equipped to. Distinguish? Roger the alien from American Dad has appeared in Family Guy multiple times, always without explanation, always briefly, and always in a way that refuses to acknowledge that he should require any explanation. He appears in the Meet the Quagmires episode asking the Griffin family who ate all the pecan sandies. He appears in the Simpsons crossover episode falling out of a spaceship during the Peter Homer fight sequence. In the episode Send in Stewie Please, Stewie briefly impersonates Roger, referring to him as the gay alien, which in the context of the therapy episode functions as one of Stewie's dozen rapid-fire impression samples before he gets back to his own voice. The consistent refusal to acknowledge Roger as requiring explanation places him in an interesting visual category. He is the most obviously science-fictional character in a show that isn't science fiction, and his recurring appearances suggest that the barrier between the Family Guy and American Dad universes is permeable in both directions. The Cleveland show ran from 2009 to 2013 and followed Peter's friend Cleveland Brown after Cleveland relocated to Stool Bend, Virginia. The show's relationship to Family Guy was always somewhat tangled. Cleveland was established as a long-running character in Family Guy before getting his own series, and the two shows periodically acknowledged each other in ways that maintained a shared continuity without ever fully committing to it. The Night of the Hurricane crossover from 2011 was the most structurally ambitious of these acknowledgments, staging a single storyline across 3 simultaneous episodes: The Cleveland Show, Family Guy, and American Dad, each following different characters through the same hurricane event. The 3 episodes aired on the same night in sequence. The crossover was described by MacFarlane as an enormous challenge and a substantial undertaking, and watching all 3 episodes together reveals the precision of the coordination involved. Specific lines of dialogue in one episode set up reactions in another. Visual details match across all 3 productions, and the overall effect of watching them in order is of something genuinely more complex than any individual episode. The Simpsons crossover is the most significant single crossover event in the show's history, for reasons both creative and institutional. The Simpsons and Family Guy are the 2 most prominent animated comedies in Fox's history. They occupy adjacent cultural space, and they have been compared and contrasted since Family Guy first aired in 1999. The crossover episode The Simpsons Guy, which aired in September 2014, had been discussed informally within both productions for years before it actually happened. The episode was enabled by the fact that Richard Appel, who became Family Guy's executive producer, had previously spent 4 seasons as a writer-producer on The Simpsons, giving him the trust and relationship with Matt Groening, James L. Brooks, and Al Jean necessary to secure their blessing for using The Simpsons characters. The episode is dense with in-jokes and meta-references about both shows. Homer throwing Emmy trophies at Peter Emmy Awards that The Simpsons has won and that Family Guy has not is the episode's most direct acknowledgement of the institutional power dynamic between the 2 shows. The fight choreography mirrors Peter's established fight style with the giant chicken, giving Homer and Peter's confrontation a specific visual grammar that's been built up over the entire run of Family Guy. Roger from American Dad appears and exits without explanation. The aliens Kang and Kodos, who appear in the episode, are shown to share a summer camp history with Roger, which is the most minimal possible canonization of their shared universe. Harry Shearer was apparently unavailable to voice his Simpsons characters for the episode, so all his characters appear visually but without dialogue, with Dan Castellaneta filling in for the one character Lenny who needed a brief speaking role. The eyes of the Griffin family characters in the Springfield sequences are drawn slightly differently from their usual appearance. The color is slightly less saturated. The pupils are slightly different in size. It's a visual effect so subtle that most viewers won't consciously register it, but it creates a faint wrongness to the Family Guy characters when they're in the Simpsons' visual world, as if they don't quite fit the resolution of Springfield. This is a genuine artistic decision, not a continuity error. Family Guy's relationship with its own crossover history extends to the meta level. In the episode, You Can't Handle the Booth, the show frames an entire episode as a DVD commentary track in which the characters watch and comment on themselves, a device that allows the show to make jokes about its own production choices, its own continuity errors, and its own relationship to the network. At the episode's end, Seth MacFarlane appears as himself, briefly, asking the cast to surround him so he can exit the building without the people from American Dad seeing him. The joke is specific enough to be a genuine in-joke between productions, MacFarlane physically avoiding the cast of his other show, and abstract enough to function as a meta-joke about the way creative people navigate the competing demands of multiple projects. The Cleveland Brown character was always notably more grounded and emotionally available than Peter's other friends, and his return to Family Guy after the cancellation of the Cleveland show was treated with a kind of quiet respect. The character had earned something during his solo run, and the show recognized this by giving him slightly more consistent characterization than Joe or Quagmire received across the same period. His divorce from Loretta and subsequent marriage to Donna were both processed through multiple episodes, and his family's arrival in the show's universe after the Cleveland show ended brought a set of characters, his stepchildren, Roberta and Rollo, his son Cleveland Jr., whose relationships with the Griffin household were occasionally explored in ways that acknowledged the fuller context of Cleveland's history. The universe connection extends to the small visual details that appear in one show and are quietly echoed in another. Both Family Guy and American Dad take place in Rhode Island-adjacent New England geography. The fictional Rhode Island municipality of the former and the Virginia suburb of the latter are connected through the character of Cleveland moving between them, but also through shared production decisions about how American suburban space looks and sounds and moves. The specific visual grammar of American middle-class domestic interiors in both shows shares certain qualities that are identifiable as McFarlane house style, even when the two productions are doing very different things with those environments. Section 10. The music, the references, and the pop culture web. Family Guy is a machine for converting pop culture into comedy, and the specific choices the show makes about which pop culture to engage with, how deeply, and in what register, reveal a remarkable consistency of taste and obsession across more than 25 years of production. The theme song's debt to All in the Family is one of the show's most important and most openly acknowledged influences. McFarlane has written about Norman Lear's 1970s sitcom with genuine reverence, calling it one of the greatest scripted television programs in history. The Family Guy opening two people at a piano, singing about the state of modern entertainment directly mirrors the All in the Family opening, which showed Archie and Edith Bunker at a piano singing Those Were the Days, an explicitly nostalgic lament for a simpler past. The Family Guy version updates the nostalgia for a different era, with Peter and Lois singing about the difficulty of finding good old-fashioned values on television. The homage is specific and sincere. McFarlane built the architecture of his show's opening on the foundation of a show he genuinely admired. Walter Murphy's score referenced specific musical traditions, with an intentionality that matched McFarlane's own musical tastes. McFarlane is a serious singer with a genuine affinity for the Great American Songbook, the tradition of jazz standards, big band orchestrations, and Broadway compositions that dominated American popular music from the 1920s through the early 1960s. He has released multiple albums of material from this tradition, receiving critical appreciation for a vocal ability that many people didn't expect from the creator of an adult animated comedy. That musical identity is encoded in Family Guy's scoring from the earliest episodes, which use orchestral arrangements and jazz inflections that situate the show's emotional moments within a very specific American musical heritage. The show's treatment of specific musical artists as recurring reference points tells its own story about the writing room's obsessions. The Conway Twitty gags, whatever else they represent as symptoms of creative laziness, are also a kind of love letter to a specific tradition of American country music. Conway Twitty was one of the most successful country artists of the 1970s, a performer whose ultra-smooth vocal delivery and romantic subject matter gave him a quality of complete, unironic sincerity that is functionally impossible to parody. The show didn't try to parody Conway Twitty, it just played Conway Twitty, unedited, at full length, and let the sincerity do its own kind of work in the context of an animated comedy. The Star Wars parody episodes deserve their own examination as a piece of the show's pop culture engagement. Blue Harvest, the first of the 3 episodes, aired in 2007 and had the Griffin characters recreating the original 1977 film with Peter as Han Solo, Chris as Luke Skywalker, Meg as Princess Leia, Brian as Chewbacca, Quagmire as C-3PO, Joe as R2-D2, and Stewie as Darth Vader. The casting is not random. Each Family Guy character was matched to a Star Wars character on the basis of the functional role they occupy in their respective universes. The father figure antagonist, the sarcastic pilot, the earnest hero, the diplomat, the comic relief duo. The deeper you look at the casting choices, the more intentional they appear. The episode reproduces specific shots from the original film with remarkable fidelity before breaking away from the source material to allow the Family Guy comedy to breathe. The balance between homage and parody is calibrated carefully, and the production values are noticeably higher than standard episodes. The show clearly spent more money on these Star Wars installments than on the average episode, a decision justified by their enormous popularity. The three-episode arc remains the most commercially successful creative risk the show ever took in a sustained way. The Bob Hope and Bing Crosby influence on the road to episodes is the show's clearest expression of McFarlane's deep personal love for classic Hollywood entertainment. The Road to series of films Road to Singapore, Road to Zanzibar, Road to Morocco, and so on were a string of musical comedies from the 1940s and early 1950s in which Hope and Crosby played loosely defined characters who traveled together, got into comic trouble, broke into song, occasionally broke the fourth wall, and displayed a chemistry that felt less like performance and more like two friends genuinely enjoying each other's company. The Family Guy Road to episodes reproduce all of this, with Brian and Stewie as the Hope-Crosby pairing. The songs in these episodes are original compositions written in the style of the era, not parodies of existing songs. They're new songs that sound exactly like old songs, which requires a level of formal understanding of the genre that goes beyond superficial imitation. The show's relationship with Star Trek is another deep well that surfaces across multiple seasons. McFarlane is an open and enthusiastic Star Trek fan. He created the Orville, partly as an expression of that love, and Family Guy contains numerous Star Trek references that range from quick cutaways to extended homages to an episode that places Peter Griffin in the context of specific episodes of the original series. The line from Peter to his son Chris, "Daddy loves you, but Daddy also loves Star Trek," and in all fairness, Star Trek was here first is one of the most purely autobiographical jokes in the show's history. The relationship with The Simpsons as a cultural reference point is present in almost every season and takes multiple forms. Family Guy has made explicit comparisons between the two shows, sometimes to its own detriment jokes acknowledging that The Simpsons got there first on various premises, jokes about the relative critical standing of the two shows, jokes about how the shows resemble each other in structure. But the most interesting Simpsons references are the ones that aren't jokes at all, that are simply the show acknowledging its own place in a tradition that The Simpsons helped establish. The family sitcom structure father, mother, three children, talking animal is common to both shows, and both shows have always known this. The difference in how they handle that shared structure is itself a kind of ongoing creative dialogue between two different visions of what animated family comedy can do. The pop culture references that have aged most interestingly are the ones from the late 1990s and early 2000s, which capture a very specific moment in American entertainment when certain cultural objects were ubiquitous in ways they subsequently ceased to be. The number of references to Pauly Shore, to specific MTV programming, to particular films from the direct-to-video era, to specific commercials and advertising campaigns from that period, these function now as a kind of time capsule, an involuntary archaeological record of what American pop culture looked and felt like in the specific moment when the show was being written. This is more interesting, in a certain way, than deliberate cultural commentary. The show wasn't trying to document 1999. It was just reflecting 1999 back at 1999's audience. But from 25 years out, the reflection becomes evidence. Section 11. The Writer's Room Secrets. The Family Guy Writer's Room is one of the most discussed and least fully documented environments in contemporary animation history. The mechanics of how the show generates material, how ideas move from pitch to page to screen, and how the specific texture of the comedy was established and maintained or not maintained across the show's run, reveals a production process that is both more rigorous and more chaotic than viewers typically imagine. Steve Callahan, who served as executive producer for a significant portion of the show's run, has described the pitch culture in the writer's room in specific terms. Writers would perform their pitches for cutaways, standing up and presenting material physically, with voices and gestures and all the theatrical commitment they could bring to a quick pitch for a 3-second joke. This performance-based pitch culture makes sense within the context of a show that relies on rapid-fire comedy. You don't really know if a physical joke is going to work until you see someone commit to it with full energy. The funniest pitches became the strongest candidates for inclusion. The process is a kind of live audition for each joke, with the writing room as the first test audience. McFarlane's involvement in the writer's room during the show's early seasons was described by those who worked there as both energizing and sometimes overwhelming. He had very specific opinions about what worked and what didn't, and his taste was the benchmark against which everything was measured. This is the normal condition of a show run by its creator. The creator's sensibility functions as the quality standard, and everyone in the room calibrates to that standard. When McFarlane stepped back from day-to-day creative involvement around 2011, the room no longer had that calibration point. Rich Appel and Alex Sulkin, who took over showrunning duties, were experienced and capable, but they were running someone else's show rather than their own, and the difference between those two conditions shows up in the writing. The writer's room's composition has been the subject of commentary both from people who worked there and from outside observers. McFarlane acknowledged in one interview that the persistent treatment of Meg Griffin as an abuse target across multiple seasons was partly a function of the writer's room being predominantly male. The specific cruelty directed at a teenage girl felt different to the men writing it than it would have to a more balanced room. And the addition of women to the writing staff in later seasons did meaningfully shift how the character was written. This is a notable moment of institutional self-reflection from a show that doesn't often engage in that kind of public accounting. The show's production timeline is unusually long compared to live-action television. An episode of Family Guy takes approximately 9 months from script to air through writing, table reads, record, animatic, overseas animation, edit, post-production, and delivery. This means the show is always writing material that is nearly a year ahead of its broadcast date, which creates interesting complications for topical references and real-world events. A joke written in January might air in October. Events that are current when the joke is written might be ancient history by the time the episode airs. This is one reason why the show's most successful humor tends to be structurally rather than topically driven, the setup and subversion jokes that work regardless of when you watch them rather than the jokes that require specific cultural context that might evaporate in 9 months. The show's approach to continuity has been explicitly casual across its run, which is both a creative choice and a production reality. When characters change in one episode and return to their prior state in the next, this is sometimes the result of deliberate reset button storytelling, sometimes the result of different writers handling adjacent episodes without full coordination, and sometimes simply the result of the show's preference for episodic comedy over cumulative character development. The show has made meta-jokes about its own continuity failings numerous times, having characters acknowledge directly that events from previous episodes shouldn't have been possible given what the audience knows. These moments are often funny, but they're also slightly defensive, the show protecting itself from criticism by being the first to name the flaw. The road to any given episode involves a table read in which the entire script is performed by the cast before production begins. These reads are attended by McFarlane, at least in the earlier seasons, the writing staff, and production personnel. The reads are often described as genuinely funny events. The cast, who are collectively among the most skilled voice performers in television, animation, bring material to life in ways that sometimes reveal the jokes working better than expected and sometimes reveal that what seemed funny on the page doesn't land the way it should. Material gets cut and reworked between the table read and the final record, based on how it performed in that environment. Seth MacFarlane's own process for voicing 4 main characters in every recording session is something he has discussed in various interviews, with a mixture of pride and logistical pragmatism. The voices are so embedded in his muscle memory after more than 25 years that switching between Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Quagmire in rapid succession is no longer the technical challenge it might appear from the outside. The greatest difficulty, he has said, is maintaining the emotional precision of each character when recording in an episodic pattern. Making sure Brian's response in one scene connects authentically to Stewie's behavior in a different scene, even when those 2 scenes might be recorded weeks apart. The show's overseas animation has been handled by multiple studios across its run: Rough Draft Studios in South Korea, Hanho Hyung-up, and others, and the communication between the Los Angeles production office and the overseas animation teams is a significant logistical undertaking. The animatic stage in which a rough version of the episode is assembled using static images timed to the audio is sent to the overseas studio with detailed notes about how specific scenes should be executed. Despite this, animation inconsistencies emerge between episodes and sometimes between scenes within the same episode, which is an accepted reality of the production model. The show's visual continuity is less precise than a fan watching obsessively might expect, and the production team is generally philosophical about inconsistencies that most viewers will never consciously register. One of the more unusual production facts about Family Guy is the extent to which the show's ancillary content, the direct-to-DVD specials, the video game adaptations, the Family Guy Live in Vegas album exists in a kind of canonical gray area. MacFarlane was personally involved in the Las Vegas album to a significant degree, and the musical recordings from that album have occasionally been referenced within episodes as if they're part of the show's universe. The video game adaptation, Family Guy, Back to the Multiverse, released in 2012, was produced with voice performances from the main cast and a story that was written in close coordination with the show's production team, closer to a canonical extension than a licensed spin-off. Whether these ancillary materials constitute real Family Guy is a question the show has never formally resolved. Section 12. The Legacy Facts, Final Easter Eggs, and the Ending Nobody Noticed. We've spent a long time together tonight, moving through the layers of a show that is much larger and much stranger than it presents itself on the surface. So let's bring it home with the details that live at the edges, the legacy information, the final Easter eggs, the things hiding at the end of long threads that most viewers never pull on. The Emmy nomination history is one of the clearest external measures of how the show is perceived across its run by the institutional structures of American television. In 2009, Family Guy became only the second animated series in history to be nominated for the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Comedy Series. The first animated show to receive that nomination was The Flintstones in 1961, 48 years earlier. Not The Simpsons with all its critical prestige and its long, storied history of quality. Not South Park, not Futurama, Family Guy. The nomination acknowledged a quality that the show demonstrated at its best, that it was doing something distinct and valuable enough to be considered against the best live-action comedies of the year. The show has received 24 Emmy nominations across its run and won 7. The specific wins tend to be in technical and performance categories, rather than writing or overall comedy, which tells its own story about where the institutional recognition was concentrating. The Performance Emmy that Seth MacFarlane won in 2019 for Outstanding Character Voiceover Performance is a particularly significant data point. MacFarlane winning for voicing multiple characters in the same show, across the same season, which is an unusual technical achievement that the Emmy system rarely finds a clean category for. TV Guide ranked the show as the 9th greatest television cartoon of all time in 2013. The context of this ranking matters. It places Family Guy in the company of shows that had been considered the canonical greats of television animation across 6 decades. Being ranked above many specific shows that had more critical prestige, more cultural longevity, and more industry respect was a statement about the show's popular impact and its cultural footprint. By 2013, the critical narrative about Family Guy had already turned somewhat. This was after the period when the show's quality decline was being discussed openly. The ranking acknowledged that the show's best work was genuinely excellent enough to place it in the conversation with the medium's highest achievements. The show's impact on internet culture is something that almost can't be overstated when you try to understand its actual legacy. YouTube launched in 2005, the same year Family Guy returned from cancellation for its 4th season. The show's format, short, self-contained cutaways that could be extracted from their narrative context and watched as standalone clips, was perfectly suited to the emerging short-form video sharing culture in a way that almost no other television format was. Family Guy cutaways became some of the earliest viral video content on the internet. The show was genuinely instrumental in establishing the visual grammar of clip culture. The idea that a television show could be engaged with primarily through its best moments rather than through sustained narrative. This success helped sustain the show through its declining ratings period. The viewership numbers for first-run broadcast episodes dropped dramatically from their revival peak, but the show's presence on streaming platforms, in syndication, and in clip form online was enormous. The show that was being watched by fewer than 1 million people on Wednesday nights was simultaneously being watched by many millions through other means. The business case for continuing to produce it was sustained by this broader ecosystem of engagement, even as the traditional broadcast numbers fell. The decision to move Family Guy from Sunday night to Wednesday night in the 2023 to 2024 broadcast season was understood immediately within the television industry as a demotion. Sunday night was the original home, the animation domination block that MacFarlane had helped build, and that Family Guy had anchored for most of its run. Moving to Wednesday was a statement about where Fox placed the show in its current priorities. The last time Family Guy aired on a weekday was during its original troubled pre-cancellation run in the early 2000s, when Fox was shuffling it around the schedule in ways that made it impossible for the audience to find. Coming back to a weekday time slot, more than 2 decades later, completed a strange circular journey that the show's earliest history would have been able to predict. The 4-season renewal announced in April 2025, extending the show through the 2028 to 2029 television season as part of what was described as a mega deal with parent company Disney, which acquired Fox's entertainment assets in 2019, guaranteed Family Guy's continuation through its 30th anniversary. 30 years. For an animated series that was canceled twice before it reached 5 years of production, reaching the 30th anniversary is an achievement so improbable that imagining it in 1999 would have required a level of optimism, bordering on delusion. The relationship between Family Guy and the network that has carried it is among the most complicated in television history. Fox canceled the show twice. Fox aired episodes without MacFarlane's permission during the 2007 to 2008 writers' strike. MacFarlane publicly compared his relationship with Fox to a failing marriage. He signed a massive deal with NBC Universal in 2020, worth approximately $200 million, moving his production company away from the Fox ecosystem. And yet Family Guy continued airing on Fox, the show providing the network with a reliable revenue source while its creator built his future elsewhere. The arrangement has a quality of mutual usefulness that has outlasted the feelings on both sides. The show's relationship with the Parent Television Council deserves a mention as part of its legacy. The PTC, which rates and advocates against programming it considers harmful to families, placed Family Guy on its list of worst primetime shows for family viewing in 2000, 2005, and 2006. The Federal Communications Commission received multiple formal complaints and petitions about the show's content. The show was pulled from cable networks in Venezuela after a 2009 episode about marijuana legalization prompted the Venezuelan justice minister to warn local cable stations against continuing to air it. A British member of parliament raised concerns about the show in the House of Commons. These reactions, collectively, describe a show that was genuinely provocative in ways that moved from local controversy to international incident. An unusual achievement for a cartoon about a family in Rhode Island. There is a final Easter egg that belongs at the very end of this journey, and it's hiding in the place you'd least expect it, the very beginning. The opening sequence of the show contains, in the background of the party scene, a detail that has been visible in every version of the opening credits since the beginning and that most viewers have never consciously noticed. The party guests in the background of that sequence include faces that match real production staff and writers from the early seasons, people who worked on the show, incorporated into the world they were helping to create, visible for a fraction of a second in every episode's first minute. They're there in every season's opening. They've been there since the beginning. The people who made the show, placed into the world of the show, dancing at the party they were building. The show's relationship with time is one of its most philosophically interesting qualities, and it becomes most visible when you look at the characters across the full span of their existence. Peter Griffin has been 45 years old for more than 25 years. Stewie has been approximately 1 for more than 2 decades. The Griffins exist in a state of suspended animation, not frozen, exactly, since the show responds to current events and cultural moments and the passage of real-world time, but not aging either. They're permanent. They were here before most of their current audience was born. They will, in some form, continue to be here afterward. The strangest and most quietly moving fact about Family Guy, when you zoom all the way out, is that it began as a thesis film made by a 22-year-old kid at an art school in Providence, Rhode Island. It became a 15-minute pitch. It became a television show. It got canceled. It came back. It got canceled again. It came back again, harder than before. It became one of the most watched animated shows in the history of the medium. Its creator grew up and grew away from it and stayed attached to it out of complicated loyalty and financial pragmatism. Its characters changed and sometimes changed back and sometimes just kept changing in directions nobody fully planned. And somewhere in there, between all the cutaways and the chicken fights and the musical numbers and the Brian and Stewie road trips and the moments of unexpected emotional honesty, it told something true about what it means to be a family messy, inconsistent, sometimes cruel, sometimes transcendently loving, always somehow continuing. The party guests in the background of the opening credits are still dancing. They've been dancing since the 31st of January 1999. They'll be dancing in 2029 when the show hits its 30th anniversary, and the faces will probably have changed, and some of the people who put those faces there will no longer be around, and the living room will be slightly differently lit than it was, and the carpet will be a shade that wasn't in the original design. But the music will still be playing. Peter and Lois will still be at the piano. And somewhere in the background, in a detail nobody asked about and nobody specifically planned, the people who made the show will still be at the party. There is always more. That's the thing about a show that has been running for 25 years. You can spend 3 hours on it and barely scratch the surface. Every season has its own archaeology. Every character has layers that reward excavation. Every episode contains at least one background detail that was placed there deliberately, addressed to no one in particular, waiting for whoever happens to look. So if you've made it this far, wherever you are, whatever time it is, thank you for spending this time with all of it. If you enjoyed this, a like and a subscribe genuinely help more than you might think, and there's a lot more to come. Drop a comment with anything you noticed that didn't make it in tonight. I genuinely read them all. Sleep well. We'll be here when you wake up. Bonus Section 1. The small towns, the big streets, and the geography of a fictional Rhode Island. One of the most overlooked pleasures of watching Family Guy carefully is the degree to which the show constructed a fictional geography that has its own internal logic, its own recurring landmarks, and its own strange relationship to the real geography of Rhode Island and coastal New England. The fictional town where the Griffins live was named after a kind of clam, a small, genuinely Rhode Island detail that functions both as a joke and as an anchor to a very specific sense of place. But within that fictional space, the show built a world that rewards the kind of attention most people don't give to animated backgrounds. Spooner Street, where the Griffin house sits at number 31, is the spine of the show's domestic geography. The neighbors are established through years of accumulating detail. Quagmire is across the street and slightly to the right. Joe Swanson is next door, with his wife Bonnie and their children. Cleveland Brown lived across the street before he moved to Virginia for his own spin-off series. Meg's school, James Woods Regional High School, is named after the actor who makes repeated appearances on the show, a choice that has never been given a full in-universe explanation. The school is named after James Woods because of events in an earlier episode in which James Woods helped the school or contributed to it in some way. The exact details vary depending on which episode you trace it back to, but the joke is that a major American film actor's name ended up on the building where these children go to school. The Drunken Clam is located somewhere within easy walking distance of the Griffin house but has never been precisely mapped relative to it. Its interior is one of the show's most carefully maintained recurring environments. The bar counter, the stools, the booths in the back, the television above the bar that is almost always showing something, the dartboard, the particular quality of the lighting that suggests a certain kind of mid-tier New England bar that has been in the same location for 40 years and doesn't need to try very hard to attract its regulars. The four friends Peter, Joe, Quagmire, and Cleveland have been meeting there for so long that their spots at the bar feel like assigned seating. Nobody sat down and decided who would sit where. It just calcified that way over time, the way arrangements in long-standing social groups always do. The brewery where Peter works, Pawtucket Patriot Brewery, is a nod to two specific Rhode Island details. Pawtucket is a real city in Rhode Island, a post-industrial city just north of Providence with a working-class character that fits the world of the Griffins perfectly. The Patriot part references the strong colonial New England identity that Rhode Island shares with Massachusetts and Connecticut, the sense that this is old American ground, that the history here is deep and present in daily life, in ways that don't always register consciously. The beer the brewery produces is a fictional brand, but the name and the setting place it in the tradition of New England regional brewing that produced real craft beer culture in the region. The Griffin's house itself has been the subject of enormous fan analysis, partly because its interior geography changes between episodes and partly because certain things that appear in the house in one season are absent in another without explanation. The living room layout is the most consistent because it's the most frequently used space: the couch, the television, the front door with its specific quality of light coming through the glass panel. The kitchen is the second most frequently visited space, and it maintains reasonable consistency across the run. The bedrooms are the show's most geographically unstable spaces. Stewie's room contains, at various points, equipment and architecture that shouldn't fit in the space implied by the exterior of the house. Brian's sleeping spot migrates between episodes. The stairs lead to different places at different points in the show's run. The Griffin's house is located in what appears to be a middle-class suburban neighborhood with the particular spatial quality of Rhode Island residential development houses, close enough together that you're aware of your neighbors constantly, yards that are functional rather than grand, streets with a slightly informal quality that comes from organic rather than planned growth. The fictional town was based loosely on Providence, which means it carries the texture of a city that was once prosperous and industrial and has since developed the particular character of a post-industrial New England city. Architectural layers from different eras, neighborhoods with distinct identities, an intense and specific local culture that's invisible to outsiders and everything to residents. The show's use of real Rhode Island geography alongside its fictional elements creates an interesting hybrid world. Providence is mentioned by name and visited in certain episodes. Real streets appear. Real institutions are referenced. But the town itself is fictional, sitting inside the real state like a bubble of alternative geography. This is a technique common to American regional fiction, the real state, with the fictional town embedded in it, allowing the show to claim the texture and identity of a real place without being constrained by its actual layout. The town's governance deserves mention because Mayor Adam West became one of the show's most beloved recurring figures. The idea of the actual Adam West playing a version of himself as the town mayor, benevolently eccentric, prone to strange personal projects, sometimes functionally incompetent in ways that the plot requires, but never in ways that feel mean, gave the show an anchor in a specific comedic tradition. The West character's mayoral decisions tend toward the grandiose and the impractical, purchasing impractical civic projects, conducting feuds with the Griffin family that escalate beyond any reasonable civic response, occasionally demonstrating competence that surprises everyone, including himself. The character is an homage to the specific quality of small city New England governance, where the position of mayor in a mid-sized municipality carries enough local prestige to attract a certain kind of personality that wouldn't be visible in national politics, but which exerts enormous influence at the zip code level. The high school where Meg, Chris, and later Stewie in various episodes attend school is drawn with the specific quality of a mid-tier Rhode Island public high school, not a wealthy district with impressive facilities, not a struggling urban school with obvious resource limitations, but the specific middle ground of a working-class suburban district where the facilities are adequate and the culture is one of low-key aspiration and slightly deflated expectations. The social hierarchy of the school, the popular kids, the outcasts, the various cliques is drawn with enough specificity that it functions as a genuine social portrait rather than a generic cartoon version of high school. One of the show's most interesting geographical conceits is the fact that the cemetery where various characters are buried and occasionally dug up, given the show's relationship with death as a recurring plot mechanic, appears to be unreasonably accessible from the Griffin home. Funerals in the show happen quickly and with a minimum of logistical friction. The cemetery is close enough to be visited on a casual afternoon. The show treats mortality with a cartoonish lightness that is partly tonal, this is a comedy, and death in comedy has different rules than death in drama, and partly a reflection of the compressed geography of its fictional world, where everything important is close enough to walk to. The Pawtucket Patriot Brewery, as a workplace, has its own recurring geography. The shipping floor where Peter works, the executive offices where his various bosses have operated, the break room where workplace-based comedy occasionally plays out, These spaces have been established across enough episodes to feel lived in. Peter's desk, in particular, has been shown in close-up enough times that fans have cataloged the specific items on it in various seasons, tracking how the desk's contents change as a reflection of what Peter was interested in or worried about during specific periods of the show's run. Whether these changes are intentional character details or casual continuity inconsistencies is genuinely unclear, which is part of what makes them interesting to think about. Bonus Section 2. The voice cast's hidden histories and what they brought to the show. The voice cast of Family Guy has been, across the show's entire run, one of its strongest consistent assets. The performances that sustain the characters through good writing and bad are doing work that goes mostly unacknowledged, because voice acting in animated comedy is the kind of craft that makes itself invisible when done well. You don't think about the acting. You just hear the character. That seamlessness is the achievement. Alex Borstein, who has voiced Lois Griffin since the first episode, came to the role from a background in sketch comedy. She was a writer and performer on Mad TV before Family Guy, and the skills she developed in that environment, quick character establishment, high-energy physical comedy translated into vocal performance, the ability to shift emotional register rapidly translate directly to how she plays Lois. Borstein has described Lois's voice as an impression of a specific Jewish relative, a woman in her life who carried the combination of warmth and exasperation and practical intelligence that Borstein built the character around. The Rhode Island accent layered on top of this foundation gives Lois a geographic specificity that makes her feel like she belongs in this world, not a generic television wife, but a woman from a particular place with a particular history. Borstein won Emmy Awards for her performance in The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel while simultaneously continuing to voice Lois Griffin, which is a remarkable demonstration of range, the same performer delivering both a period drama comedy series and a long-running animated sitcom, with equal commitment and distinct skill. Her double life as a drama-adjacent performer and an animation veteran gives her a credibility that occasionally shows up in how the show writes Lois in its more emotionally demanding moments. When Lois has a genuinely hard scene, a moment of real feeling that the show asks you to take seriously, Borstein's performance holds the weight. Seth Green, who voices Chris Griffin, brought to the role a quality of guileless warmth that is entirely consistent with how the character is written, but which doesn't feel like a performance choice as much as a fundamental quality of how Green sounds. Chris is awkward, kind-hearted, not very smart, and occasionally surprising in the depth of his feeling and Green voices. All of this with the specific vocal quality of someone who is genuinely and simply present in every scene, not commenting on the character or maintaining ironic distance from him. This is a harder thing to do than it sounds in a show that is constantly operating at several layers of self-awareness simultaneously. Mila Kunis was 17 years old when she took over the role of Meg Griffin in Season 2, replacing Lacey Chabert, who had voiced the character in the first season. The transition happened at a moment when Kunis was already established as a television presence. She had been Jackie Burkhart on That 70s Show since 1998, but taking on the role of Meg added a very different register to her profile. Meg Griffin is the character the show uses most mercilessly for its darkest comedy, and voicing her through seasons of escalating abuse required Kunis to maintain a performance that kept the character sympathetic even when the writing was working hard to undercut her. She has spoken publicly about the strange experience of having the catchphrase used to dismiss Meg Peters' dismissive line, directed at his daughter, become something that real people would say to her in real life, as if the fictional cruelty had a legitimate claim on the real person who provided the voice. The first season voice of Meg, Lacey Chabert, is now much better known to the general public for her work in holiday films and for her role as Gretchen Wieners in Mean Girls than for her one season as Meg Griffin. The character in Chabert's version sounds slightly different younger, with a different quality of anxiety, and comparing the two versions of Meg in early episodes reveals how much of a character's personality can be carried by the specific qualities of a voice performance. Mike Henry, who voiced Cleveland Brown from the character's introduction through the cancellation of The Cleveland Show and his eventual return to Family Guy, was one of the original members of the show's cast, and came up through the RISD connection that runs through so much of the show's history. Henry met MacFarlane at RISD, and the setting that MacFarlane chose for Family Guy fictional Rhode Island was partly influenced by that connection. Cleveland Brown's gentle, unhurried vocal quality, The specific way Henry voiced him as someone who processes the world slowly and thoroughly rather than reacting quickly gave the character a distinctive presence within the main group that provided a useful counterpoint to Peter's bombast and Quagmire's nervous energy. The show's recurring guest cast developed their own techniques for inhabiting characters that needed to feel consistent across multiple appearances separated by months or years of production. Adam West's mayor character, as mentioned earlier, benefited enormously from West's willingness to commit to the bit completely. West was not doing a self-parody from a distance. He was inside the character, playing the absurdity as earnestly as if it were a drama. The specific quality of an actor playing his own fictional name as if the fictional character and the real person occupied the same continuous identity is unusual, and West was gifted at it. Carrie Fisher's Angela was written specifically for Fisher after the producers decided they wanted someone with a very specific quality of sardonic authority for the brewery boss role. Fisher's public persona, sharp, funny, self-aware about her own Hollywood history, capable of devastating one-liners, delivered with the ease of someone who has been doing this her entire adult life, was written into how Angela was conceived. The character has moments of warmth that are surrounded by a defensive competence that reads, in retrospect, as drawing from something real in Fisher's own experience of navigating a difficult industry for several decades. The show's approach to celebrity cameos is one of its most revealing practices, because you can tell from the quality of the cameos which guests came in with genuine enthusiasm and which were merely competent. Rush Limbaugh, appearing in a MacFarlane-created show that disagreed with him politically about nearly everything, did something braver or at least stranger than most. He played a version of himself that was fully capable of being satirized, and he did it with enough good humor that the satirizing felt earned rather than hostile. Whether this represents genuine self-awareness on Limbaugh's part or a calculation about the publicity value of appearing on a show with that audience demographic is impossible to know from the outside, but the performance itself landed. There are numerous cases of the writers building jokes and storylines around specific cast members' real-world histories and personalities. MacFarlane's own musical abilities have been incorporated into the show through Brian's musical moments and through the musical episodes, and road to sequences that require full-length original songs. The show's commitment to original musical production, which is remarkable given how much easier it would be to license existing music for a show this size, reflects MacFarlane's personal investment in that tradition. The show's relationship with its guest cast extends to how it handles death. When a voice performer dies while mid-contract with an ongoing recurring role, the show faces a choice between recasting and retirement. The two most significant examples, Adam West and Carrie Fisher, were both resolved by retirement rather than recasting, which says something about the show's priorities. These weren't just functional roles that could be handed to any competent voice actor. They were performances so specifically tied to their performers that finding a replacement would have been a different kind of honoring than simply acknowledging the loss. Bonus Section 3. The show that knew too much predictions, coincidences, and strange timing. Family Guy has a well-documented history of appearing to predict real-world events with uncomfortable accuracy, so well-documented, in fact, that it has become a minor cultural industry, with new lists appearing after every major news cycle pointing to an episode that seemed to see it coming. Most of these apparent predictions are better explained by a combination of probability, production timelines, and the show's willingness to engage with edgy, topical material. But some of them are genuinely strange, and the specificity of a few is worth sitting with. The Boston Marathon bombing episode is the one that most people know about because the timing was so precise it almost defied statistical explanation. The episode Turban Cowboy, which aired on the 17th of March 2013, contained a cutaway in which Peter inadvertently runs over participants in a road race while driving a car that's been given to him by people connected to a bombing plot. The connection between a fictional road race incident and a bombing at a real road race almost exactly 1 month later created a reaction that was impossible to manage. Fox's decision to pull the episode from digital platforms was made within days of the bombing. Whether the timing constitutes a prediction depends entirely on your definition of the word. The show's content had nothing to do with the actual mechanics of what happened in Boston, and the similarity was coincidental rather than prescient. But the coincidence was real. The Caitlyn Jenner appearance is the most frequently cited example of the show appearing to see something before it happened. In a 2007 episode titled "We Love You, Conrad," Stewie encounters Brody Jenner on the set of a reality show and says something like, "I can't believe he came out of Bruce Jenner's body." And when Brian corrects him, Stewie insists that Bruce Jenner is an elegant, beautiful Dutch woman. This was in 2007. Caitlyn Jenner publicly came out as a transgender woman in 2015, 8 years after the episode aired. The Family Guy writers, by their own account, knew nothing about Jenner's private gender identity. The joke was written as a piece of absurdist humor about a celebrity whose public persona they found amusing. But the specificity of Stewie's language, beautiful, Dutch woman, the precision of the feminizing, has always made this one feel less like a random coincidence and more like an unusually accurate guess. The Kevin Spacey situation is another case where the show's historical record becomes uncomfortable in retrospect. A joke in an early season referenced Spacey in a way that seemed to know something about his behavior with young men in the context of a gag, not a serious accusation, but with the specific kind of winking implication that the comedy community sometimes uses to signal awareness of an open secret. When revelations about Spacey's actual behavior became public in 2017, MacFarlane was explicit that the writers had no genuine knowledge. The joke was random, written for the feel of the joke rather than from any factual basis. He distanced the show from any claim of prescience clearly and quickly. But the joke exists, and knowing what came after, it reads differently. The Robin Williams episode Coincidence is the most hauntingly timed. The episode Touch the Sky from season 13 contained a storyline involving Peter being cursed so that everyone and everything he touched became Robin Williams, a piece of absurdist, celebrity-based comedy that was current and slightly sharp at the time it aired. On the 11th of August 2014, Robin Williams died by suicide. The same day, BBC Three was airing a broadcast of the Family Guy episode in question. The episode was pulled from subsequent schedules. The timing was genuinely devastating in its specificity, not just that the show had made a Williams-centered joke in recent memory, but that the particular episode was literally airing at the moment the news was breaking. Paul Walker's death in November 2013 created another eerie parallel. Walker died in a high-speed car accident on the 30th of November 2013. In the Family Guy episode Life of Brian, which aired on the 24th of November 2013, 6 days earlier, Brian Griffin died after being struck by a car. Two characters named Brian dying in car-related accidents in the same week. The family of Fast and Furious films had made Walker's character's name Brian famous. The coincidence of the two deaths, one fictional and one devastatingly real, produced a reaction online that was out of proportion to any rational assessment of what a coincidence means, but the timing was undeniable. The show's most genuinely prescient apparent prediction involves a 2009 episode in which Stewie mentions attending what is clearly a class or event at an organization with specific similarities to an organization that would later become prominent in a public scandal. The details are not specific enough to constitute actual foreknowledge, but they're specific enough that fans who discovered the episode after the relevant public revelations consistently point to it as one of the more unsettling entries in the show's prediction catalog. MacFarlane and the writing staff have developed a practiced response to the prediction phenomenon, which runs roughly as follows. The show engages with so much topical material, so many current events, so many public figures and their public behaviors, that statistical probability alone guarantees some number of apparent coincidences between fictional content and real events. The show runs for 9 months from script to air. It covers a huge range of subjects. Over 25 years and hundreds of episodes, the law of large numbers produces what appear to be predictions, but are actually just patterns emerging from a sufficient volume of content. This is a reasonable explanation. It doesn't fully account for the specificity of certain coincidences, but it's reasonable. There is one prediction the show made that is simply factually correct and not coincidental at all. The prediction that Bruce Jenner would transition. The show's writers were not psychic. They were working with cultural knowledge about gender and identity and a specific public figure, and they made a joke that happened to be accurate in a way that hadn't yet been publicly confirmed. This is what happens when creative people are paying close attention to the world around them and are willing to make jokes that most people don't think they're allowed to make yet. Sometimes those jokes turn out to be true. The show has made jokes about its own apparent predictability, acknowledging the phenomenon from the inside with its characteristic mixture of self-awareness and commitment to the bit. In a later season episode, a character references the show's record of accurate predictions in a way that functions both as a joke and as a quiet boast. The show knows you've noticed. It wants you to keep noticing. Bonus Section 4. The Road to Episodes. A complete history of the show's best tradition. The Road to Episodes occupy a special place in Family Guy's history because they represent the show at its most formally ambitious, its most emotionally honest, and in the best cases, its most artistically confident. There are 9 Road to Episodes across the show's run, each one pairing Brian and Stewie in an adventure that draws on the tradition of the Hope Crosby Road pictures, while developing the two characters' relationship in ways that the standard episode format doesn't allow. Road to Rhode Island, from Season 2, is the first and in some ways the most foundational. The episode follows Brian and Stewie attempting to get back to the family after being stranded far from home. The dynamic established here, Brian as the world-weary adult trying to manage a situation, Stewie as the brilliant but volatile wildcard, whose interventions create as many problems as they solve, became the template for all subsequent Road episodes. The musical numbers in this episode are original compositions that capture the specific sound of early 1940s film musicals with genuine accuracy. The song On the Road to Rhode Island is a pastiche so well executed that it functions as a kind of loving preservation of a musical style that doesn't get much attention in contemporary entertainment. Road to Europe, from Season 3, sends Brian and Stewie to England and Europe in pursuit of Stewie's obsession with the British children's television series Jolly Farm Review, a fictional program that Stewie watches with intense devotion. The episode uses the road format to explore Stewie's relationship with his own accent in an early and somewhat understated way. Being in England, surrounded by people whose accents match his own, disturbs something in his carefully constructed sense of self. This element of the episode is subtle enough that it was probably invisible to most viewers on first watch, but it's there. Road to Rupert from Season 5 is often cited by fans as one of the best episodes in the show's history. The plot follows Brian and Stewie's attempt to retrieve Rupert after Peter accidentally sells the bear at a yard sale. The emotional stakes, Stewie's desperate attachment to his bear, the tenderness with which Brian handles Stewie's distress, make this one feel more invested than many other episodes from the same period. The musical sequence in the Alps is one of the show's most visually ambitious moments from that era of production. Road to Germany, from Season 7, sends the duo back to World War II-era Berlin, a setting that allows for a specific kind of dark historical comedy that the show generally handles with more care than its treatment of contemporary subjects. The episode's willingness to engage seriously with the period's horrors while maintaining the lightness of the adventure format requires a tonal precision that the episode mostly achieves. Road to the Multiverse, from Season 8, is the most formally inventive of the Road episodes, and represents a peak of ambition for the entire subseries. The episode uses a device that allows Brian and Stewie to travel between parallel universes, each with its own visual style. One universe is rendered in the style of Disney animation from the 1930s, lush, round, with the specific quality of light associated with Snow White and Pinocchio. One universe is a Flintstone-style prehistoric setting. One is live action, with CGI versions of Brian and Stewie interacting with real human actors. Each universe is visually distinct and immediately recognizable as a specific animation tradition, and the episode's ability to move fluently between these styles while maintaining its narrative coherence is remarkable. Road to the North Pole, from Season 9, extends across 2 episodes and sends Brian and Stewie to the actual North Pole, where a specific critique of consumer Christmas culture is delivered through the vehicle of what appears to be a holiday special, but is actually something considerably darker. The episode contains some of the series' best original music and some of its most unsettling imagery, deployed in service of a genuine satirical argument about the holiday retail complex. Roads to Vegas, from Season 11, is the structural experiment of the series. The episode splits its timeline, following 2 versions of Brian and Stewie having different experiences in Las Vegas simultaneously, with the 2 timelines converging at the end in ways that require attention to detail to fully follow. The episode's concept is more interesting than its execution at certain points. but the commitment to formal experimentation gives it a place in the canon, as an attempt to do something that the standard road format hadn't tried yet. Road to India, from season 15, takes the duo to South Asia and engages with Indian culture and cinema in ways that are characteristic of the show's later approach to international material, more ambitious than its early approach to cultural specificity, but still operating with a certain cartoon shorthand that limits how deeply the episode can go. The Bollywood musical sequence is visually spectacular. Road to Cincinnati, from season 17, brings the series closer to home geographically, but extends it emotionally. Following Brian and Stewie's relationship through a storyline that references the full history of what they've been to each other. The episode is partly elegiac, a road episode that knows it is one of many road episodes that acknowledges the tradition it's part of, and that finds something genuine to say about two characters who have been on this particular kind of journey together for many years. Across all 9 entries, the Road to episodes represent the show's most consistent creative achievement. They are the episodes that most reliably produce both genuine comedy and genuine feeling. They are the episodes most likely to be cited by fans as the show at its best. They are the episodes in which Brian and Stewie's relationship, the show's most interesting and most carefully tended character dynamic, is given the space and the musical framework to reveal itself fully. And they are, without exception, visually distinctive. Each Road to episode looks different from the standard show, sounds different, and moves at a different pace. The difference is intentional. The Road episodes were given more resources and more creative latitude than standard episodes, and the results are visible. When you watch them back to back, as a series, they tell a continuous story about two characters who keep coming back to find each other for these journeys, and the accumulation of those journeys becomes its own kind of narrative. Bonus Section 5. The Giant Chicken Extended Universe. The giant chicken, his name is Ernie. His species is a full-size production chicken. His grudge against Peter Griffin began with an expired coupon, is one of Family Guy's most unexpected canonical fixtures. The chicken fights appear approximately once per season at varying intervals, always epic in duration, always increasingly elaborate in setting and execution, always ending in a draw or a temporary resolution that both parties know won't hold. The first chicken fight appeared in Da Boom from season 2, when Peter tried to redeem an expired coupon for a free chicken dinner from a chicken named Ernie who was handing out promotional material. When Ernie refused to honor the expired coupon, Peter reacted with disproportionate physical force. The fight that followed was enormous, cinematic, and completely unforeshadowed. Nothing in the show's first season and a half had prepared viewers for an episode in which the main character and a large domestic chicken would engage in the kind of extended combat sequence, usually associated with action films. The creative decision behind the chicken fights was explained by McFarlane in interviews as coming from a desire to create a recurring joke that had no punchline and required no explanation, that existed purely as a physical comedy escalation machine. The joke is not what happens during the fight. The joke is that the fight happens at all, that it continues at all, that neither party finds a way out of the cycle they've entered. Peter and Ernie are locked together by a grudge over a coupon, and the disproportionality of the ongoing conflict is the entire comedic content of every subsequent encounter. Later installments began filling in Ernie's backstory, giving the chicken a wife, a life, apparent domestic stability that Peter keeps interrupting. This humanization of the antagonist added a new layer to the joke. Now the fights aren't just about two parties locked in unresolvable conflict, they're about two parties who each have lives that the fight keeps damaging. Ernie has someone who waits for him at home. His marriage has been strained by the frequency with which Peter arrives and destroys whatever domestic peace Ernie has managed to construct. In some episodes, the fight ends with Ernie and Peter in a moment that implies resolution, a shared exhaustion that functions as almost friendship, before circumstances reignite the conflict. The locations of the fights have escalated across the series in direct proportion to the ambition of the production team working on each installment. The first fight was domestic. It happened in and around local Providence area environments. Subsequent fights moved to larger and more elaborate settings: construction sites, moving trains, underwater, outer space, historical periods accessed via time travel, movie parody locations. The fight in The Simpsons crossover episode extended into Springfield, with Homer and the rest of the Simpsons universe serving as a backdrop. The fight in the Star Wars parody episodes was reimagined as a lightsaber duel. The show has made the chicken fights one of its most self-aware recurring elements, periodically inserting them into genre contexts that comment on the genre, while delivering the familiar physical comedy of the base format. There is an entire subset of Family Guy fan analysis devoted to tracking the precise choreography of each chicken fight against real martial arts and action film stunt work, mapping the moves that Peter and Ernie perform against actual combat techniques to determine whether the fight choreography is internally consistent across installments. The answer, broadly, is that the fights are choreographed with genuine attention to physical plausibility within their own exaggerated register. They're not random. They follow specific action film grammar, and that grammar is maintained across different directors and animation teams. The chicken fights look right because someone is paying attention to making them look right. Ernie's full name, Ernie the Giant Chicken, positions him as a specific character within a specific category. He is not just any chicken, he is Ernie. He has a name, which means he has an identity, which means his ongoing conflict with Peter is a conflict between two named individuals, rather than a generic man versus animal situation. This is a subtlety that most viewers absorb unconsciously, but which distinguishes the chicken fight from other recurring physical comedy bits in the show's history. Bonus Section 6: The music that never stops. Original songs and the show's musical universe. Family Guy has produced more original musical content than almost any other animated comedy in television history, outside of dedicated musical shows. The number of original songs written for the show across its run is extraordinary, and the quality of the best of them represents a genuine artistic achievement that exists somewhat independently of whether you like the show's comedy. The commitment to original music rather than licensed material was a consistent, creative choice from the earliest seasons, driven largely by McFarlane's personal musical interests and his genuine skill as a composer and singer. The songs that appear in the show range from 30-second comedy numbers to fully produced theatrical pieces that would not sound out of place in a stage musical. The song A Bag of Weed, which appears in the episode 420 from Season 7, is one of the show's most perfectly constructed original musical numbers, a parody of the upbeat, patriotic musical idiom of late 1950s television variety shows, deployed in service of a marijuana legalization argument. The song sounds exactly like the thing it's parodying, which requires genuine compositional knowledge. A surface-level parody can capture the general vibe of a musical style. An effective parody requires understanding the specific harmonic language, the specific rhythmic patterns, the specific melodic conventions of the style, and then reproducing them accurately enough that the parody works as both comedy and pastiche. The song You Have AIDS from the episode The Cleveland Loretta Quagmire is the show's most uncomfortable original musical number, a cheerful barbershop quartet-style performance of terrible news, deployed to maximum effect in the specific context of how barbershop arrangements carry a cultural weight of sunny optimism that makes the content of the song even more jarring. The joke depends entirely on the gap between the form and the content, and the musical performance is precise enough to make that gap as wide as possible. The show's Christmas special episodes have produced several original songs that have developed independent cultural lives, circulating on holiday playlists and in gift shop novelty contexts, far outside the show's usual fandom. McFarlane's genuine affection for Christmas music, the specific American tradition of lush orchestral holiday songs, comes through in these performances in ways that transcend parody and function as genuine contributions to the tradition. The Road to Episodes' original songs constitute their own catalog, as noted in the earlier section. What bears adding here is that the songs in The Road to Episodes were composed in close consultation with McFarlane's musical instincts and recorded with production values that significantly exceed what would be necessary for an animated comedy. The vocal performances in The Road to songs, McFarlane and Green working together on the duets, have the quality of genuine musical collaboration rather than functional voice work. The melodies are memorable. The arrangements are specific and intentional. The lyrics do comedic and emotional work simultaneously. The Family Guy Live in Vegas album, recorded in 2005, is one of the stranger artifacts in the show's ancillary history. The album features McFarlane and the cast performing big band arrangements in a Las Vegas-style live setting, with McFarlane performing in his own voice rather than character voices for much of the set. The album received better critical reception than most people expected for what appeared to be a television show cash-in, because McFarlane's actual singing ability is substantial enough to sustain a full concert performance, and the arrangements by Walter Murphy are genuinely excellent. And with that, you've traveled through something like 30,000 words of Family Guy history, character depth, hidden detail, animation secret, production fact, and quiet revelation. The show that's on television right now is different from the show that was on in 1999, and both are different from the show that was on in 2005 or 2010 or 2015. But running underneath all of it, across every version and every season and every creative shift, are the same people you met at the beginning. Peter, Lois, Meg, Chris, Stewie, Brian still on Spooner Street, still connected to each other in the complicated way that families are connected, still finding their way through a world that doesn't entirely know what to make of them. The party in the opening credits is still going. Thank you for spending this time here. If this helped you drift off peacefully, or kept you company through a long night, that's exactly what it was made for. Like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you want more like this, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. I genuinely love seeing where in the world this reaches. Sleep well. End of script. Bonus Section 7. Every episode has a history. Within the sprawling catalog of Family Guy episodes, certain individual installments have their own stories that extend well beyond what aired. Some were controversial, some were almost never made. Some changed the show's direction in ways that weren't visible until years later. And some contain details and references so specific that they function as private conversations between the writers and the audience. Things that are there for the people who know to look. Brian in Hollywood from Season 2 is an episode with a small, easily missed reference near its end that functions as a perfect example of how the show hid real production information inside the comedy. The episode involves Brian going to Hollywood to work in adult films, and in a scene toward the end, an award ceremony for adult entertainment is underway. The award for Best Original Score in an Adult Film is presented by adult film actor Ron Jeremy, and the nominees listed include Ron Jones and Walter Murphy, the actual composers who scored Family Guy. Both of their names appear in the category for adult film scoring as a quiet, self-deprecating joke about the show's own musical department, slipped into a scene that most viewers would only absorb as a general industry parody. Death Has a Shadow, the very first episode that aired following the Super Bowl in January 1999, contains within its first few minutes a constellation of character details and visual choices that establish the entire visual and comedic grammar of the show. The specific way the opening scene of Peter in bed is lit, the specific family dynamics visible in the first kitchen scene, the way the show introduces each character with a very precise economy of detail, all of this was composed by a 24-year-old who had been given the opportunity of a career and understood that he had approximately 3 minutes to make the audience understand who these people were before they changed the channel. The pilot episode is a masterclass in character introduction pacing, and most people who have seen it don't notice how carefully it's constructed because the construction is invisible. The episode Stewie Kills Lois from Season 6 is often cited as the last truly great ambitious episode the show produced before the quality decline became irreversible. The two-parter is remarkable not just for its content but for what it represented about the show's relationship with its own mythology. Up to that point, Stewie's desire to kill Lois had been a constant background element, always present, occasionally foregrounded, but never consummated. The decision to actually let him do it within the controlled environment of a 2-episode arc that had a built-in escape hatch was genuinely brave by the show's standards. The Brian and Stewie Vault episode from Season 8 has a production history worth knowing. The episode was pitched as an experiment in stripping the show down to its essential elements, removing every element that typically made Family Guy recognizable as Family Guy, no cutaways, no additional characters, no pop culture jokes, just 2 characters, 1 location, 1 night. The network reportedly had concerns about the format, which was so different from the standard show that it represented a genuine creative risk. The episode was defended by the creative team, went forward and aired to some of the strongest critical response any revival-era episode had earned. The willingness to abandon the show's signature comedy tools and trust the characters to sustain the full runtime proved something important, that the characters were capable of more than the standard format typically asked of them. The episode PTV from Season 4 is one of the show's most pointed pieces of media criticism, an episode about broadcast standards enforcement that directly addressed the real regulatory environment in which Family Guy operated. The episode aired at a moment when the FCC was genuinely aggressive in pursuing violations following the Janet Jackson Super Bowl incident of 2004, and the show's response was to make an entire episode about censorship that was itself deliberately provocative. The episode includes a fake censorship bar that appears over things the FCC couldn't actually object to normal household objects, faces as a parody of how arbitrary content regulation can feel. The Simpsons Guy was produced over approximately 2 years, from initial conversation to broadcast. The episode required animating characters from both shows, with complete fidelity to each show's visual grammar, which meant the Family Guy production team was animating Simpsons characters, and the Simpsons production team was providing input on how their characters could be depicted in a context over which they didn't have full creative control. Harry Shearer was reportedly unavailable to voice his Simpsons characters for the episode, so his characters appear visually but without dialogue throughout, with Dan Castellaneta providing one brief fill-in line for a character whose appearance required it. The technical and institutional complexity of producing this episode makes its final coherence genuinely impressive. The Hurricane episode from Season 10 is both a standalone episode and part of the Night of the Hurricane crossover with The Cleveland Show and American Dad. Its specific place in the show's history is secured by the Meg confrontation scene, the moment the show had been building toward for several seasons, when Meg finally names what has been done to her and by whom. The emotional structure of that scene seems to promise a resolution it then explicitly refuses to provide. The episode resolves with Meg voluntarily resuming her role as the family's emotional container. The decision to resolve the episode this way was controversial, and the specific message it communicated about the show's relationship with Meg's character generated the most sustained critical discussion of any single episode in the show's history. The Road to the Multiverse episode remains the most formally inventive single episode in the show's catalog. The production budget was significantly higher than standard because of the need to animate in multiple distinct visual styles, each requiring different technical approaches. The Disney-style animation sequence in particular required the most preparation. The Disney aesthetic of the 1930s is one of the most technically specific and labor-intensive animation styles in the mediums. History and the show didn't approximate it. It produced something genuinely accurate to the Disney style of that era, involving historical research, reference gathering, and technical implementation that went far beyond what a standard episode required. Bonus Section 8. The world of supporting characters. The supporting cast of Family Guy is large enough that a complete accounting of every recurring character would itself constitute a significant document. But there are specific figures whose backstories and hidden details reward attention. Joe Swanson was introduced in Season 1 as someone the neighborhood admired, and Peter envied disciplined, courageous, physically impressive despite his wheelchair. He had become paraplegic in the line of duty, chasing criminals, saving someone important in the process. His disability was established as evidence of his heroism rather than in spite of it. Patrick Warburton's specific vocal quality, deep, authoritative, notably controlled in a comedy context, where most voices trend toward expressiveness, gave every Joe scene a quality of grounding that balanced the energy around him. His voice carries a professional steadiness that makes the comedy he participates in feel earned. Tom Tucker, the local news anchor, possesses a quality of professional self-absorption the show uses as reliable background characterization. His son Jake Tucker, who has an upside-down face, appears occasionally as a recurring visual disruption. The upside-down face is never explained. Jake Tucker simply exists, his face oriented against all anatomical logic, appearing in the background with the energy of someone who doesn't know anything is wrong. Diane Simmons, the recurring news anchor, was written out of the show in the Season 9 murder mystery episode And Then There Were Fewer in a way that constituted a significant character event. Making her the villain of the episode meant her retirement was built into a narrative climax rather than simply announced. Lois shooting Diane at the episode's resolution is one of the show's most surprising Lois moments, and it was set up carefully enough that the surprise worked. Bonnie Swanson spent many seasons of the show visibly pregnant. The extended pregnancy wasn't entirely planned. It was partly the result of the character being rarely written into episodes and the production team defaulting to her established visual presentation whenever she appeared. When the show finally resolved the pregnancy, it did so with complete acknowledgement that the timeline had been impossible, folding the impossibility into the joke rather than treating it as a continuity error to be corrected. The recurring character of James Woods as himself developed from a one-off cameo into a mythology of its own. Woods played a version of his public persona so externalized that every quality of instability associated with him became a comedy weapon. His vulnerability to manipulation by small pieces of candy, the specific, strange recurring plot mechanic, is such an odd choice for the show's mythology that it feels like it must be based on something real, even if no one is saying what. Doctor Elmer Hartman, the family's doctor, has appeared across most of the show's run as a recurring comedy figure whose incompetence is the defining characteristic of every medical scene. The show uses Hartman as a way to handle the medical storylines that occasionally become necessary in a series where characters periodically need medical attention. He provides a ready source of comedy through his consistent failure to practice medicine at a competent level, which means the show can address medical situations without committing to realistic medical outcomes. His existence in the show is a kind of safety valve for medical plotting. Meg's nemesis, Connie D'Amico, is a specific type of high school social villain, mean, popular, threatened by anyone who exists outside the hierarchy she controls, relentlessly cruel in ways that the show treats as genre-appropriate rather than dramatically significant. Her treatment of Meg is the most sustained piece of pure cruelty in the show's history, and the fact that she never faces genuine consequences for it is consistent with the show's approach to Meg's suffering across the middle of its run. She exists to make Meg's school life as difficult as her home life, completing the portrait of a character surrounded on all sides by environments that refuse to see her. The Giant Chicken's wife, an unnamed character who appears in the background of some chicken fight episodes, represents one of the show's quieter pieces of character expansion. The chicken has a domestic life. The chicken has someone who is waiting for him to come home. The chicken fights aren't just abstract escalations between Peter and a bird. They're events that disrupt two households, two lives, two people's domestic peace. The wife's presence turns what could be a purely comedic premise into something with at least the suggestion of consequence, which is characteristic of the show's best approach to its most absurdist recurring elements. Final thoughts and gentle goodnight. 25 years of one family. 25 years of one street. 25 years of the same voices, some of them pushing through grief and age and change and the various losses that accumulate over that much time, coming back into the recording booth and being Peter, being Lois, being Stewie, being Brian, being Glenn Quagmire asking for things he shouldn't ask for, and meaning more than he says. The show has disappointed people who loved it. It has made decisions that hurt characters it should have protected. It has chosen shock over craft more times than it should have, and it has leaned on its most reliable comedy mechanisms past the point of reliability into the territory of habit and reflex. All of that is true and documented and has been examined carefully in the sections above. But the show also gave us Brian and Stewie in a vault, telling each other the truth. It gave us Stewie finally dropping the accent in a single episode and showing us who he actually was before slamming the door again. It gave us the full, precise sadness of Peter's relationship with his two fathers and what he inherited from each of them. It gave us Lois holding everything together through the specific kind of competence that goes unnoticed precisely because it never fails. It gave us Meg, who just wants to be seen, who deserves better than she gets, who will be getting better in the later seasons thanks to writers who finally decided she was worth the care. It gave us the road to episodes, and the music, and the opening credits still running after all this time with those background faces dancing at the party they were invited to build. Whatever else it is, it's theirs. And they've been letting us in for 25 years. That's enough for tonight. Leave a comment with where you are and what time it is. Hit like and subscribe if you want to keep going with things like this. And take care of yourself out there. Sleep well. End of script final. Bonus Section 9. The legacy in numbers, records, and cultural impact. To fully understand how large Family Guy's shadow is, you need to look at the numbers, not as ratings data which tell the story of a declining audience, but as cultural penetration data, which tell a very different story. The show's ratings fell dramatically over its run. Its cultural footprint did not fall in proportion. The show has generated more internet video views from its clip format than almost any other scripted television program in history. This is an estimate rather than a precise figure, because the clip economy of the internet doesn't track cleanly, but the volume of Family Guy content circulating on YouTube, on social media, on streaming platforms, in reaction videos and compilation formats and tribute channels is staggering in its breadth. The cutaway format, which critics correctly identified as a symptom of creative laziness in later seasons, was also, from a digital distribution perspective, the most perfectly designed content format for the era of short-form video. Each cutaway is self-contained, extractable from context, functional at 30 seconds, shareable without setup. The format that hurt the show's internal quality made it immortal as a content delivery system. The merchandise revenue from Family Guy across 25 years is a figure that has never been fully disclosed publicly, but industry observers place it in the hundreds of millions of dollars. The show's characters are among the most recognizable in global consumer product history. Peter Griffin's silhouette is identifiable across cultures that have never watched the show and never will. Stewie Griffin's face appears on products in countries where the show has never aired in its original language. The characters exist in the global consumer consciousness as icons that have transcended the specific content that created them. The show's influence on subsequent adult animation is profound and mostly invisible because it's been fully absorbed. The rapid-fire reference structure, the cutaway format, the willingness to engage with deeply uncomfortable subject matter for the sake of a joke, all of these characteristics spread from Family Guy into the broader ecosystem of adult animated comedy in ways that are now simply assumed as genre conventions. Shows that came after Family Guy adopted its grammar so completely that newer viewers encountering the show for the first time sometimes think it's imitating its imitators rather than the other way around. The specific cultural space that Family Guy occupied in the early 2000s, adult animated comedy with a specific New England working-class sensibility, willing to engage with dark material but ultimately anchored in a family structure that provided emotional scaffolding for the comedy, was genuinely distinctive when the show began. The Simpsons had established that animated family comedy could be sophisticated and genuinely excellent. Family Guy established that animated family comedy could be transgressive and still be about a family in ways that felt real. These are different contributions, and they produce different kinds of imitators. The show's relationship with its own fandom is one of the more interesting aspects of its cultural legacy. Family Guy fans are deeply invested in the show's history, deeply knowledgeable about its production details, deeply opinionated about its quality arc, and deeply committed to maintaining the conversation about what the show was and what it became. The fan community is not uniformly positive about the later seasons. In fact, the most dedicated fans tend to be the most critical because they understand most clearly what was lost. But the dedication persists. 25 years in, people are still writing about the show, still tracking its details, still watching the old episodes and comparing them to the new ones. This is the specific quality that separates a cultural institution from a popular show. Popular shows attract audiences. Cultural institutions attract people who feel ownership over them, who feel that what happens to the show matters to them personally, who are willing to be disappointed by it and keep showing up. Family Guy is a cultural institution. Whatever happens to it between now and its 30th anniversary and beyond, it has already earned that status through the depth and breadth of the attachment it created. The show's final legacy, the one that will be assessed when the last episode eventually airs, whenever that is, will probably be complicated. The early seasons will be remembered as genuinely excellent by everyone who lived through them. The middle and later seasons will be remembered with a mixture of affection and frustration. The decline will be part of the story. The brief moments of recovery, the vault episode, the road episodes, the occasional Meg episode that got it right, the individual sequences that showed what the show could still do when it tried, will also be part of the story. And underneath all of that, the people who were there at the beginning will be part of the story. A 24-year-old kid with a thesis film, a security guard with a distinctive voice, a Rhode Island art school where the future was being made in studios too small to imagine what came next. That's the story. It's a good one. Bonus section 10. The details hiding in the details. Final layer of Easter eggs. There are Easter eggs in Family Guy that exist so deep in the show's visual and audio architecture that they never fully surface into public discussion. These are the ones for the very last stretch of a long night. In the episode Road to the North Pole, there are two frames in the extended sequence of a real Santa's workshop, a dark, disturbing reimagining of the mythological space where a specific detail appears on a shelf in the background. The detail is a small model of the Griffin House, placed on a shelf among other items with no explanation. The Griffin House as a miniature, in Santa's workshop, in an episode about the exploitation of labor and the machinery of holiday commerce. Whether this is an intentional visual joke about the commodification of the show's own characters or a casual piece of set dressing by an animator who thought it would be funny is unknown. It's there either way. In the episode Back to the Pilot from Season 10, when Brian and Stewie visit the timeline of the show's first episode, several background details in the Griffin House are carefully rendered to match the specific animation style of the original 1999 pilot. Slightly rougher lines, slightly different proportions, the specific color palette of the first season. The episode is meta-commentary on the show's own history, and the care given to recreating the visual texture of the original is a form of respect for that history that sits underneath the comedy. In multiple episodes across multiple seasons, the newspaper that appears on the Griffin family's front doorstep or in Peter's hands contains readable headlines if you freeze the image. These headlines are almost always gags that have nothing to do with the episode's plot. Small comic rewards for anyone patient enough to pause and read. Some are absurdist, some are topical. Some are specifically addressed to the kind of viewer who would pause a Family Guy episode to read the newspaper in the background, which is to say, they're addressed to you. If you're the kind of person who does that sort of thing, the show's production code system contains a hidden organizational logic that dedicated fans have partially decoded. The specific alphanumeric codes assigned to each episode in production order don't always match the broadcast order, which means that episodes with certain codes aired out of sequence from when they were produced. Tracking the production codes against the broadcast dates reveals which episodes were held, which were moved, and which were produced but aired in positions different from where the writers had them in the seasonal arc. The production codes are visible in copyright metadata for home video releases and have been cataloged extensively in fan databases. The voice director's notes from certain recording sessions have occasionally circulated through fan networks, and they contain specific coaching directions for the cast that reveal how certain performances were shaped. The direction given for specific Stewie scenes in early seasons was focused on maintaining the specific contrast between the baby's physical vulnerability and the character's psychological menace. Performers in similar villain roles were referenced as models for specific moments. The direction given for Brian in scenes of emotional honesty was consistently toward underplaying, pulling back from the expressiveness that would be natural for the emotional content of the scene, letting the stillness do the work. The specific fonts used in the show's title cards and in-episode text have been consistent enough across the run that changes in typography between different seasons are legible as markers of transition points in the show's production history. The fonts used in the Season 4 revival are different from those used in the original 3 seasons, and the differences are visible enough that dedicated viewers can sometimes date an unfamiliar clip by its typographic style before any other visual information is available. The background music that plays in The Drunken Clam during bar scenes is not random. Walter Murphy composed specific recurring themes for recurring locations within the show's world, and the bar music tracks across the show's run can be analyzed as its own musical narrative. The themes that play in the early seasons have a specific quality, and the themes in later seasons have a different quality that tracks with the show's overall tonal shifts. The bar has its own score, and the score changed as the bar's emotional function in the show's storytelling changed. In the episode where Meg is shown using Facebook, the profile picture on her account is slightly different from the standard character model. Her expression is subtly different, slightly more hopeful than the standard Meg expression, as if her digital self-presentation is attempting something her physical presence in the show's world rarely achieves. This is either a deliberate character detail or an animator's small gift to a character who doesn't often get small gifts. Given that it was noticed and documented by fans rather than highlighted by the production team, it's impossible to know which. And then there's this. In the show's opening credits, if you slow the image down during the final dance sequence, where the family reveals their performance outfits, the fraction of a second before each reveal contains a frame where the characters are mid-transition, half civilian, half performer, the costume not yet fully in place. In this transitional frame, the characters look briefly different from both their civilian and their performance selves. They're between identities. It's a few frames. Nobody was meant to see it clearly. But it's there. As it has been since the beginning, the characters caught between who they are and who they're about to perform being visible for a fraction of a second before the music takes over and everything snaps into the familiar. That's the show, really. All of it. The fraction of a second between identities, the transition that nobody was meant to see, the realness underneath the performance. Visible only if you know to look and patient enough to slow everything down. Sleep well, you've earned it.